Chapter 859. Yellow Yi stared at Helian Ping for a long time, then sighed. Forget it, you're also injured, get up. Let's talk about this after you've recovered. Although Yellow Yi was very unhappy because of Helian Ping, he would not cut off his own arm at this time. He waved his hand to signal Helian Ping to get up. Helian Ping thanked him and stood up. Yellow Yi looked at Helian Jin sitting on the side and asked, "Uncle, what do you think?" Helian Jin had been silent since he came back. Seeing Yellow Yi ask him, he sighed and said, "I didn't expect Emo Xiuyao to change so much in just a short 10 years. Your Highness, if Emo Xiuyao is not eliminated, he will become a great threat to the northern tribes." Yellow Yi frowned and said, "Uncle is right. However, there are countless people who want to get rid of Emo Xiuyao, but who has ever succeeded? The Emo Xiuyao today is not the Emo Xiuyao of the past. In the past, the Prince Ding mansion was restrained by the Dechu state's royal family, so they had a chance to deal a fatal blow to the Prince Ding mansion. Unfortunately, the snake did not die, which allowed Emo Xiuyao to grow into the northern tribe's biggest enemy. Now the Prince Ding mansion was separated from the Dechu state and Emo Xiuyao had the final say. Moreover, the Prince Ding mansion was of the same mind, so there was no weakness. Helian Jin looked down and said, "Today Prince Ding's only weakness is Princess Ding." "Oh, absolutely not," Yellow Yi said sternly. Helian Jin was stunned, looking at Yellow Yi in confusion. Yellow Yi smiled helplessly and said, "Uncle, don't you understand what happened today? In the future you don't have to think about Yi Li unless Emo Xiuyao is dead. No one can touch Yi Li." Emo Xiuyao's actions today clearly told everyone that if anyone dared to touch Yi Li, he would kill them even if he had to die. Fortunately, today's matter could be considered as a warning. If Emo Xiuyao really decided to kill them today, even if Emo Xiuyao died of exhaustion in the end, the three of them would not be able to escape before he died. People in power always said that they would do whatever it took, but this did not include themselves. Now that they were dead, so what if they killed Emo Xiuyao? So what if they destroyed the Prince Ding mansion? Wasn't it someone else who would benefit from it? Helian Jin pondered for a while and finally he sighed and said, "I didn't expect that the Prince Ding mansion would have such a romantic." Helian Ping stood up and said to Yellow Yi, "Your Highness, this general requests permission to go to the Spirit Vulture Mountain camp." Yellow Yi frowned and said, "You still want to deal with Yi Li?" Helian Ping said, "I won't make a move against Princess Ding again. However, Princess Ding is currently overseeing the Spirit Vulture Mountain camp, and our army also needs someone to guard it. Princess Ding is resourceful, I'm afraid that the people stationed there are." Yellow Yi thought for a while, then nodded and said, "That's good, you can go after you've recovered. Don't provoke Yi Li again." In the end, Yellow Yi couldn't help but warn him. Helian Ping nodded and said, "I understand, my injuries aren't serious, I can set out tomorrow. You can go." Yellow Yi waved his hand and said no more. In the Emo family army's camp, young Master Feng San's aura was imposing. His handsome face was filled with anger as he glared at a certain someone who was slowly bandaging her wound. The harsh words that came out of his mouth were so harsh that if an ordinary person heard it, they would be so ashamed that they would slit their own throats and commit suicide in order to escape. But Prince Ding, who had just finished a massacre, was clearly in a very good mood, not taking young Master Feng San's curses seriously at all. He didn't need anyone's help, he just casually grabbed a cloth to bandage the wound on his arm. As for the other small injuries, he simply didn't care. "Feng San, when did you become an old woman? Aren't you tired of nagging?" After bandaging his wound, Emo Xiuyao raised his eyes and glanced at young Master Feng San, indifferently saying. Young Master Feng San couldn't help but choke, his anger rising as he roared, "Emo Xiuyao, you're fucking looking for death. Don't drag the entire Prince Ding mansion to die with you. You broke into the northern militants' camp alone, you Prince Ding have the best martial arts in the world, why don't you go kill Yellow Yi, king of the northern militant, Enchanting and Mo Jingli? Once they're all dead, the world will be at peace. Of course, in the end, don't forget to slit your own throat with a sword." At the end, young Master Feng San was so angry that he laughed, revealing a malicious and mocking smile at Emo Xiuyao. "Noisy," Emo Xiuyao said indifferently. Feng Xiao was so angry that he picked up the things beside him and threw them at Emo Xiuyao, then slammed the table and left. "Go die if you want, I'm not doing it anymore." Finished speaking, he angrily walked out. Fortunately, there were only the two brothers Han Mingyue and Han Mingxi in this tent. If the Mahist army's generals saw this, Feng Xiao wouldn't be able to escape the crime of offending his superior. Emo Xiao frowned, then casually caught the things that Feng Jiao threw over. Stop, where are you going? I'm going to Spirit Vulture Mountain. If you dare to go finally, I will break your legs. Emo Xiao said darkly. Alright, I know what happened today. It's just to teach Yellow Yi a lesson. I won't come here again. You guys must be tired, go back and rest. Finished speaking, Prince Ding waved his hand, turned around and left the tent, leaving behind the deeply hurt Feng Jiao, who sat there in a daze. After a long time he finally reacted. Emo Xiao. I saved your life and you want to break my legs. What do you mean by sacrificing your life for the opposite sex? That's it. What do you mean by stabbing your brother twice for your wife? Just look at Prince Ding and you'll know. Han Mingyue and Han Mingxi looked at each other, then sympathetically patted Feng Jiao's shoulder and walked out. Whatever happened in the Mahist army's camp, under Prince Ding's strict and threatening orders, naturally Yili wouldn't hear about it. Yili took Qin Feng and the others to Spirit Vulture Mountain's camp that night. Because Spirit Vulture Mountain wasn't the main battlefield, and it was supported by Feihong Pass. The Prince Ding mansion didn't have many soldiers, so naturally, they wouldn't deploy too many soldiers here. Only Zhang Qilan's deputy general Zhou Min led 50,000 Mahist army and 50,000 Dechu State's soldiers to guard here. Yi Li and the others didn't give any advance notice when they arrived, so naturally no one came out to greet them. But the situation outside the army made Yi Li frown. It was already late at night and the Mahist army, except for the patrolling soldiers, should have already gone to bed. But Yi Li and the others hadn't even gotten close to the camp when they heard the noise coming from inside. This wasn't the noise of something happening in the army, but the sound of soldiers drinking and fooling around. Yi Li's beautiful face suddenly darkened. Zhuo Jing and the others were originally from the Shadow Guard and had never been in the army. Qin Feng was originally from the Black Cloud Cavalry, and the Black Cloud Cavalry's discipline was stricter than the normal Mahist army. They had never seen such a situation and their faces turned ugly. Yun Ting and Qin Yun were both from the army. Yun Ting coughed softly and said in a low voice, Wang Fei, this shouldn't be the Mahist army soldiers, but the former Dechu State soldiers that we gathered after we recovered the lost land of Dechu State. Yun Ting had been in the Dechu State's army. Although Murong Shin's military discipline was strict, there were always some who disobeyed. He had also heard of many cases where military discipline was loose. These Dechu State soldiers had been utterly defeated by the northern tribes. If the Mahist army hadn't gathered them, they would have been no different from bandits. Yun Ting wasn't surprised that such a situation had occurred. Yi Li quickly understood the crux of the matter. This Lingjiao mountain camp was run by the Mahist army and the Dechu State's army respectively. The Dechu State's remaining soldiers couldn't compare to the Mahist army in terms of battle strength or other aspects. Perhaps some of them had given up. Zhou Min had just made a bet and it wouldn't be easy for her to control them. Suppressing the anger in her heart, Yi Li said lightly, let's go in and take a look. Seeing the group appear at the gate, the guard who had been playing the finger-guessing game finally remembered his duty. He quickly stood up and asked sternly, who are you? Yi Li asked in a low voice, where is General Zhou? When the guard saw that there was a young and beautiful woman in the group, he couldn't help but look down on her. He waved his hand and said, the military camp is an important place. How can a woman like you ask about it? Why aren't you leaving? Impudent. Qin Feng said in a low voice, Princess Ding is getting married. Why aren't you letting General Zhou come out to receive her? The guards couldn't help but be stunned. They sized up Yi Li and the others and couldn't help but laugh. You said she is Princess Ding? A weak little girl dares to pretend to be Princess Ding. How bold. I think you are all spies from the northern tribes? It had to be said that although Princess Ding's fame was too great, there weren't many people who had seen Yi Li before. And Yi Li's appearance was too deceiving. Under the night sky, she really did look like a weak young lady from a wealthy family. If she is Princess Ding, then wouldn't I be Prince Ding? A guard smiled proudly. Impudent. Qin Feng's expression suddenly changed. Before the guards could see clearly how he moved, the man who spoke just now was grabbed by him and fiercely thrown to the side of the gate. Immediately, a mouthful of blood spurted out. That person raised his head in shock. A bright sword was already at his throat. Qin Feng laughed coldly and said, you have guts. Do you not want to live anymore? The others were also shocked by this sudden turn of events. They immediately cried out in alarm. They even forgot about the signal and war drums when the enemy attacked. Yili and the others frowned when they saw this. Very quickly the camp became even more lively. Many soldiers rushed over, but all of them looked like they were in a mess. When they saw that the people at the gate were not the enemy's soldiers, but a few outstanding-looking men and women, they were all stunned. They didn't know what to do. Until a drunk-looking general walked over, the guards guarding the door then hurriedly came forward to report. Reporting to General, "These people are impersonating Ding Wangfei and want to barge into the camp." "Wah, what? How dare?" The general was about to fly into a rage when a black jade pendant was placed in front of him. Shuijing said coldly, "Have you seen clearly?" The general's eyes widened. He looked at the black jade pendant in front of him and his legs went soft. "Ding. Princess Ding?" Yili stepped forward and looked at him indifferently and said, "Who are you? Do you understand? Where is General Zhou?" The general hurriedly said, This general is the Dechu State's Luozhou City commander Sun Yawu. General Zhou's camp is still about 10 li away from here." It turned out that ever since Zhou Min and Sun Yawu were ordered to be stationed here, the Maoist army and the Dechu State's remaining soldiers didn't get along well. These remaining soldiers were beaten up badly by the northern tribes and were almost useless on the battlefield. If it wasn't for the fact that they were worried that they would wander outside and harm the people, they would have already been stripped of their armor and returned to their fields. Zhou Min had just taken charge and didn't have enough prestige. The Maoist army's discipline was strict, but he couldn't control these remaining soldiers of the Dechu state. Helpless, Zhou Min didn't expect them to do anything. He only let them set up camp about 10 li away from the battlefield while he led 50,000 Maoist army soldiers to guard the front against the northern tribes. Because it was close to Feihong Pass and Feihong Pass was guarded by more than 200,000 soldiers of Yuan Pei, it wasn't very difficult. In such a situation even Yili was very angry. If it wasn't for Yili's insistence on coming to Lingjiu Mountain, perhaps when the two armies fought in the future, this place would be the first place to have a problem. This general didn't know that Wang Fei was coming and didn't receive you. Please forgive me. Wang Fei, please go to the camp and rest for a while. This general will send someone to invite General Zhou over. Sun Yawu didn't know how to fight, but he was very skilled in flattery. Yili was displeased. Just as she was about to refuse to leave and head to Zhou Min's barracks, the sound of a horse's hooves could be heard from afar. In less than a moment, a middle-aged man rode his horse over and stopped at the door. When he arrived in front of Yili, he lifted his robe and knelt on one knee. This General Zhou Min greets the princess. Chapter 860. Yili was not familiar with Zhou Min. She had only seen her a few times in Zhang Qilan's army and had been placed in important positions by Zhang Qilan. Zhang Qilan was an upright and fair person. Since he could promote Zhou Min to lead an army alone, it proved that there was no problem with his ability. Yili looked at the man in front of her who had a serious expression and was resolute and silent. She nodded and said, General Zhou, you may dispense with the formalities. Sun Yawu saw that Zhou Min had come so quickly and his expression was not good. The drunkenness on his face had completely disappeared and a shrewd light appeared in his small eyes. He looked at Zhou Min with a fake smile and said, General Zhou, why have you come so quickly? General's camp is not far from where this general is. Zhou Min did not seem to hear Sun Yawu's sarcasm and slightly frowned as she reported to Yili, Wang Fei, it is already late. Will Wang Fei rest here for the night or go to the Maoist army's camp? Yili had a better understanding of the relationship between the two armies. The remaining soldiers of Dechu State were naturally envious of the elites of the Maoist army and disliked them. The elites of the Maoist army naturally looked down on the remaining soldiers of Dechu State that had been beaten to a pulp by the northern tribes. Sun Yawu naturally disobeyed Zhou Min's orders. Zhou Min also looked down on the remaining soldiers. Aren't you unhappy? He doesn't need you. You can go wherever you want to be. Yili thought and said, it's late. We won't disturb the rest of the generals. We'll just stay here for the night. If General Zhou doesn't have anything to do in the camp, you can also stay. Ben Fei has something to say tomorrow morning. Zhou Min hesitated but did not say anything. She nodded and said, yes, Wang Fei. Seeing Yili give such an order, Sun Yawu's eyes had a trace of pride. Walking in front of Yili, he smiled and said, Wang Fei, please. This general did not know that Wang Fei was coming. There are no Yahuan in the camp to serve you. This subordinate will send someone to find 2 people to serve Wang Fei. Yili stopped, looked at Sun Yawu indifferently and asked, "It's so late. Where does General Sun plan to find a maid?" Sun Yawu said nonchalantly, "There are many villages near Spirit Vulture Mountain. Wouldn't it be easy to find a few girls? It is their good fortune to be able to serve Princess Consort. There's no need. When I'm away from home, this consort doesn't pay much attention. If General Sun has nothing else to do, you should rest early." After speaking, Yili ignored Sun Yawu's expression and walked towards the camp. Sun Yawu was stunned for a moment before he hurriedly went forward to lead the way for Yili. The next morning, when Yili stepped into the big tent in the middle of the camp, there were already quite a few people inside. Even the generals of the Mahist army that were 10 li away had arrived. The 2 sides were seated on different sides. Without looking at the color of their uniforms, it was possible to see who was Zhou Min's subordinate and who was Sun Yawu's subordinate. Yili asked with a slight frown, "Where is General Sun?" Everyone looked at each other. Finally, a young general stood and said, "Wang Fei, General Sun hasn't woken up yet." Hearing this, the Mahist army all had disdainful expressions. A straightforward person couldn't help but mock. "It's almost noon and he hasn't woken up yet. General Sun really can sleep. No wonder." The other side also had discontent expressions. Someone couldn't help but complain, "There's no battle, why is he up so early?" Yili faintly lowered her eyes. A moment later she raised her head and said in a deep voice, "Go invite General Sun to rise." 40 strokes of the cane. The big tent instantly became silent. The Mahist army had expressions that this was how it should be. Even Zhou Min's expression softened greatly. He also could not stand Sun Yawu's conduct, but his rank was not higher than Sun Yawu's. Also, the status of these Dechu state soldiers was special. Even if he could not stand it, he could only turn a blind eye. Wang Fei's actions naturally allowed them to vent their anger. A short while later, Sun Yawu was pulled out and pressed outside the tent to be beaten with the cane. What was surprising was that Sun Yawu looked like he was bullying the weak and flattering the strong. He did not even make a sound after being beaten with the cane. Yi Li's gaze slowly swept across the faces of Sun Yawu's subordinates. She was deep in thought. After the cane was finished, Sun Yawu was dragged in. With Lin Han personally supervising this punishment, he naturally wouldn't go easy on Sun Yawu. The back of Sun Yawu's shirt was a bloody mess. He was placed on the ground and just lay there. This general greets Wang Fei." Yi Li looked down at him and said lightly, "General Sun, do you submit to me beating you with the cane?" Sun Yawu stilled and said with a bitter smile, "Wang Fei has given this subordinate the cane. This subordinate naturally does not dare to refuse." Yi Li raised an eyebrow and said with a smile, "You don't dare to refuse? Then you still refuse?" Sun Yawu quickly changed his words, I submit wholeheartedly." "Then tell me, why did this Fei hit you?" Yi Li asked. "This." Sun Yawu stilled. He said that he had woken up late, but he felt that it wasn't just for that. Actually, Sun Yawu already had an answer in his heart. He just did not dare to say it in front of Yi Li. Yi Li did not look at him and said lightly, "Do you think that this Fei hit you because General Zhou Min and the others have a problem with you? Or is it because of what happened last night?" Sun Yawu's expression changed slightly. It was obvious that Yi Li had hit the nail on the head. Yi Li shook her head and said, "This Fei hit you because you woke up late today." Sun Yawu stilled. He did not believe that the reason was so simple. Naturally, he did not believe that Zhou Min would not make things difficult for him in front of Princess Ding. He heard Yi Li say, "General Zhou. If a general of the Mahist army is late for a meeting, what will happen?" Zhou Min looked down and said with a stern expression, "Reporting to Wang Fei, for someone who is late without a valid reason, he will be beaten 40 times. Yi Li looked at Sun Yawu with a smile and asked, "General Sun, does waking up late count as a valid reason?" Sun Yawu said somewhat embarrassedly, "This general knows his mistake. This general accepts wholeheartedly." Yi Li nodded and ordered, "Help General Sun up." Zhuojing and Qin Feng helped Sun Yawu up on his left and right. They did not allow him to refuse and helped him to a chair at the side to sit down. Sun Yawu had just been beaten 40 times and was in so much pain that he broke out in a cold sweat. As soon as he touched the chair, he reflexively wanted to stand up, but Qin Feng casually pushed him back down. Knowing that Princess Ding wanted to sort him out now, Sun Yawu could only bitterly sit down. Looking at Sun Yaowu with a smile that was not a smile, Yili looked at everyone and said lightly, "From today onwards, this Fei will be overseeing the Lingjiu mountain camp. General Zhou and General Sun will still be in charge of military affairs. This Fei will pretend that everything that happened before did not happen, but if something that should not happen happens again." Lin Han, the Maoist army's military rules. Lin Han swept a glance over Sun Yaowu's group and said expressionlessly, "Gathering a crowd to cause trouble, you will be beaten 100 times. During wartime you will be beaten 50 times for drinking alcohol, 30 times for not working and resting on time. Dereliction of duty you will be beaten 100 times. Delaying military plans you will be beheaded. Disobeying military orders you will be beheaded." Chapter 861. After Lin Han finished reading, Yili said, "Starting from today these are your military rules. Ben Fei will not punish normal soldiers. If there is a violation, Ben Fei will punish you for not being strict enough." After saying this, Yili sent everyone out. Walking at the very back, Sun Yaowu hesitated. He wanted to speak but stopped. Yili seemed to have known this would happen. She looked at him with a smile and said, "General Sun, do you have something to say?" Sun Yaowu thought for a moment and said, "Wang Fei's meaning just now, does it mean, in the future we will be the same as the Maoist army?" Yili raised an eyebrow and asked, "Did General Zhou embezzle your pay?" Sun Yaowu had a bitter expression and remained silent. The Maoist army did not treat them unfairly. Even though they had basically just sat in the barracks and had nothing to do in the past few months, fighting and defending had all been taken by the Maoist army. Zhou Min had not embezzled a single cent of their pay, taking the same amount of money and food as the other, but one was ready to fight at any moment, and the other was just sitting in the barracks catching lice. Anyone with a bit of shame would feel embarrassed. The Maoist army looks down on us defeated generals. After a long time, Sun Yaowu managed to squeeze out a sentence. Hearing this, Yili chuckled. After a long time she looked at Sun Yaowu and said, "General Sun, based on what Ben Fei saw last night, even beheading you would be a light punishment. Do you know why Ben Fei is not punishing you? You don't think that Ben Fei is soft-hearted and cannot kill you, do you?" I don't dare," Sun Yaowu said embarrassedly. Based on the fact that he had been forced to sit here for almost an hour without being able to move, he knew that this Wang Fei had many tricks up her sleeve. It really had nothing to do with being soft-hearted. Yili smiled at him and said with a faint smile, "It's good that you don't dare." Sun Yaowu shrunk his neck back and did not dare to make a sound. He finally understood that this famous Princess Ding was not to be trifled with and was not easy to fool. It was no wonder that those arrogant generals of the Maoist army were convinced by her. Thinking to this point, Sun Yaowu no longer had his cowardly and crafty appearance. He raised his head and said to Yili, "Wang Fei, as long as the Maoist army sincerely accepts us, we will naturally wholeheartedly serve the Prince Ding mansion." Sun Yaowu looked uneasily at Ding Wang Fei, who was seated with a calm expression. He wasn't sure if his gamble was right or wrong. After a long time he heard Yili say indifferently, "General Sun, do you know why this consort didn't directly punish you for your crimes after seeing the situation in the barracks last night?" Sun Yaowu stared blankly for a moment, but he didn't dare to play any tricks. He honestly said, "This general doesn't know." "Princess, please tell me." Yili said, "That is because you did your duty. On the way here the people near your barracks were quite peaceful. It can be seen that even though you indulged your subordinates, you still had a sense of propriety. Even more so, even though you reeked of alcohol when you came out to greet this consort, but that wine was poured at the time and you weren't really drunk. Marquis Nan had mentioned you to this consort, but this consort was disappointed when I saw you." Sun Yaowu lowered his head and smiled bitterly, "So Marquis Nan is still alive. I'm just a defeated general, I don't dare to trouble Marquis Nan." It turned out that when Sun Yaowu was young he had once served under Marquis Nan. Even though it wasn't long and he was only a small captain, Marquis Nan had an impression of him. Clearly he wasn't a useless person. Yili looked at him and said, "This consort understands your meaning. However, this consort also wants you to understand that the Maoist army will never look down on the strong. If you lose you can fight again. Last time you lost, next time you win, no one will look down on you. As the saying goes, victory and defeat are common in war. But now, they do have a reason to look down on you." Sun Yaowu muttered unwillingly, General Zhou only arranged for us to clean up the battlefield. How would we have the chance to fight back? Yili laughed lightly. From now on, you and General Zhou will each lead an army and guard a pass. Like this if you lose again. Sun Yao's eyes lit up and he said loudly, if I lose again, this general is willing to take off his armor and return to the fields. This general's soldiers will be at Wang Fei's disposal. Yili smiled with satisfaction. Very good, it's a deal. It's a deal. This general will take his leave. Waving his hand to let Sun Yao leave, Zhuojing said worriedly, Wang Fei, is Sun Yao okay? It wasn't that Zhuojing looked down on people, but the situation yesterday was too terrible. Even the army's appearance was disorderly. The soldiers were lazy and had no fighting spirit. Handing over a large camp to him really made people feel uneasy. Yili smiled and said, this person is interesting. Look at the battles he fought. There's a saying that is correct. The fault of not fighting. It's not that he's useless, it's that he was unable to turn the tide in the situation. Also, to be able to gather tens of thousands of injured soldiers and control them from harming the common people, this person has some ability. Yili pointed at the report under her hand and pushed it over to Zhuojing. Qin Feng didn't understand. Then what was he doing before? If the one who came wasn't the good-tempered Wang Fei, but someone like Lu Jingxian or Zhang Qilan, Sun Yao would probably be pushed out and beheaded immediately. Yili smiled and said, it's probably because they feel that Zhou Min looks down on them. This is another way of protesting. As for whether he can do it or not, it'll depend on his performance later. If he really is good, then he can be considered a valiant general in the Mahist army. If he can't do it, then it won't be too late to deal with him. Zhuojing put down the report and smiled. It's really interesting. This Sun Yao almost took back Luozhou City a few times. Unfortunately, he didn't have enough troops and had no reserves, so he could only be chased by the northern tribe's army. Even so, he was still able to gather 50 to 60,000 soldiers along the way. Qin Feng raised his eyebrows and smiled. It seems that he does have some ability. Wang Fei's eyes are very good. Yili smiled faintly. I hope he won't disappoint me. Sun Yao's ability was not bad. Although the overall fighting strength of his soldiers was not on the same level as Zhou Min's Mahist army. But the few times they fought with the northern tribes, they won more than they lost. Dechu State's soldiers were not as weak as others thought. By the time He Su arrived with over 200,000 soldiers, the Mahist army had gradually accepted Sun Yao and his defeated soldiers. With He Su's 200,000 soldiers, the front line at Lingjiu Mountain was impregnable. After Yili discussed with the generals, she adjusted the defensive line. The 300,000 soldiers were divided into 3 camps and formed a crescent shape to guard the area outside Feihong Pass. She also transferred 50,000 men from He Su's army to Sun Yao, who was the weakest. Sun Yao was instantly filled with gratitude and was completely convinced by the sting Wang Fei. Helian Peng had not even recovered from his injuries when he brought his men to the northern tribe's camp not far from Lingjiu Mountain. A few days after he arrived, he saw that his injuries were more or less healed and brought his men to challenge the Mahist army camp. The Mahist army around Lingjiu Mountain was divided into 3 camps and relied on each other. Helian Ping naturally did not know which camp Yili was in and only brought his men to challenge the camp closest to the northern tribe's camp. This was where Sun Yao's assistant was. Sun Yao was full of energy and would not let Helian Peng humiliate him. He immediately gathered his men and went out to meet the enemy. Chapter 862. Coincidentally, Yili happened to be patrolling Sun Yao's place. She was curious about Sun Yao's ability to lead troops, so she secretly followed him. In front of the 2 armies, Sun Yao looked at Helian Peng's arm under the cloak and laughed proudly. General Helian, our princess asked me to ask you if your injury has healed. Why are you in such a hurry to challenge me? Helian Peng's face turned cold. Helian Peng had learned martial arts from Murong Xiong since he was young and thought that he was different from ordinary northern tribespeople. However, he did not expect to be injured by Yili, a weak girl with weak internal energy. Not only did he lose face in front of Yelu Yi, it also dealt a huge blow to Helian Peng's pride. Sun Yao immediately exposed his scars. Helian Peng stared at Sun Yao with killing intent. Have your injury healed? Why don't you ask your princess to take a look? To deal with trash like you, one hand is enough. Helian Peng said in a low voice. He thrust his new saber forward. General Sun, do you want to try? Sun Yao shrunk his neck. He knew that in terms of martial arts, even 10 of him would not be enough to defeat Hellion Ping. His eyes turned and he smiled. I am not a martial arts expert. How would I have the time to spar with General Hellion? General Hellion, come and try my new dog-beating formation. With a wave of his hand, the soldiers behind him roared and charged forward. Although Hellion Peng was familiar with the language of the Central Plains and had dabbled in the art of war, he could not figure out what this dog-beating formation was. He only felt that it was not something good. With a cold snort, the horn behind him sounded and the Northern Tribe's soldiers roared and charged forward. The Northern Tribe's soldiers were mainly cavalry. The Northern Tribe's cavalry was so powerful that even the Black Cloud cavalry had to avoid them. This was naturally related to the terrain of the plains. However, such cavalry was not suitable for most places in the Central Plains. Although there were no high mountains near Spirit Vulture Mountain, there were still many hills and narrow terrain. The cavalry was not able to move freely. The soldiers under Sun Yao's command chopped off the horse's legs with their scimitars, while the spear-wielding soldiers dismounted the horse's rider. There were also those who wielded short swords to finish off the horse's rider. Their teamwork was very good. As for the dog-beating array, it was purely a verbal attack to mock Hellion Ping. Unfortunately, Hellion Ping didn't have a sense of humor and didn't receive it at all. For the sake of speed and convenience, the Northern Tribe's cavalry did not wear heavy armor like the Black Cloud cavalry. After a few rounds, they were at a disadvantage. Yili watched the battle from the shadows and realized that Sun Yao was rather unscrupulous when it came to fighting. It didn't matter what kind of formation it was as long as it could injure people. It was fine as long as it could injure them. The soldiers of the Dechu state and the Mahist army were used to being serious. The sudden appearance of Sun Yao caught the Northern Tribes off guard. The battle ended in less than 2 hours. Hellion Peng's face darkened as he gave the order to retreat. Although they hadn't lost, they had suffered an unknown loss. Sun Yao didn't chase after him and cheerfully sent people to clean up the battlefield and carry the dead Northern Tribe's horses back to add to the dishes. General Sun really makes me see you in a new light. Yili smiled as she looked at the proud Sun Yao. Sun Yao hurriedly said, This general is rude and has embarrassed himself in front of Princess. Yili shook her head and said, General doesn't have to be so polite. Today's battle has really opened my eyes. Seeing that Yili didn't seem to be joking, Sun Yao could only laugh dryly and didn't know what to say. Yili knew that this was his nature and didn't mind. The Prince Ding mansion in the north had just pacified the north and was in full battle with the northern tribes. Naturally, they had no time to care about the south. The people in the south weren't idle either. Ever since Mo Jingli brought Dongfang Yu back to Jiangnan, Dongfang Hui also brought the power of the infinite boundless mountain to secretly infiltrate the Dechu state's court. Although Dongfang Hui didn't appear in the court, the entire Dechu state's court was vaguely under the control of the infinite boundless mountain. The only one who could slightly contend against them was the Empress Dowager in the harem. The Empress Dowager had reached an agreement with Mo Xiuyao to protect her life and her reputation. Naturally, there was a price to pay for this. Moreover, the infinite boundless mountain controlled the power of the Dechu state. This would only be more disadvantageous to the Empress Dowager, who was gradually losing her power. The Empress Dowager was naturally willing to cooperate with the Prince Ding mansion. As a result, the Empress Dowager and Mo Jingli completely fell out in the court. After Mo Jingli had the support of the infinite boundless mountain, he was naturally anxious to ascend the throne. He was extremely displeased with the little nephew who occupied his throne. However, the Empress Dowager and some of the old officials in the court swore to protect the little emperor. As a result, the people on both sides fought openly and secretly. The Dechu state's court was turbulent inside and outside. Dongfang Hui secretly controlled the Dechu state's court and gradually found some interesting things. Although the infinite boundless mountain's position was high, how could the secluded cultivation be compared to the power and influence of the Empress Dowager? As a result, Dongfang Hui put more energy into suppressing the Empress Dowager's party. When she came back to her senses and found that something was wrong, the Xiling army had already surrounded the infinite boundless mountain. For Mo Jingli, the infinite boundless mountain was just a mountain. If there was no more, they could just change to another place. However, for Dongfang Hui, the significance of the infinite boundless mountain was no less important than the Chu capital to the Dechu state. Mo Jingli could lose the Dechu state, but she, Dongfang Hui, could not let the Xiling army destroy the infinite boundless mountain. She could not afford to lose that person. Helplessly, Dongfang Hui could only leave all the affairs in Jiangnan to Dongfang Yu and hurried back to the infinite boundless mountain with people. However, Dongfang Hui did not know that with Dongfang Yu's temper, leaving such an important matter to her would cause big trouble. More importantly, she could not return to the Dechu state this time. Although Dongfang Hui received the news very quickly, the Xiling army and Su Qingchen were obviously faster. The natural protective formation outside the infinite boundless mountain could not stop young Master Qingchen for too long. When Dongfang Hui arrived at the infinite boundless mountain, the Xiling army had already occupied the entire main peak of the infinite boundless mountain. Having obtained many secrets of the infinite boundless mountain, the West Hill and the Prince Ding mansion naturally began to mercilessly clean up the spies and properties that the infinite boundless mountain had placed in various places over the years. For a time, except for Jiangnan and a few extremely secretive forces, all of them were cleaned up. For a time, the vitality of the infinite boundless mountain was greatly damaged. Even if it was not destroyed, it would not be able to recover without 50 to 60 years. Dongfang Hui hated Enchanting and Su Qingchen to the core, but she could do nothing. She could only return to Jiangnan with the remaining subordinates. However, before she could cross the Cloud Billow River, she was stopped by Lei Tingfeng and Su Qingchen. Prince Genom of Gojoseon, young Master Qingchen, you are indeed capable. Dongfang Hui, who was already at the end of her rope, looked at the two juniors in front of her with a complicated expression. She had never thought that one day the infinite boundless mountain would be so easily destroyed because of her injuries. Even more so, she had never thought that she would be forced into such a state by two juniors. Young Master Qingchen was gentle and elegant, smiling mildly without speaking. Lei Tingfeng smiled and said, Madame Dongfang, you flatter us. Speaking of this, for us to be able to await Madame's grand arrival here, we still have to thank you for being of infinite boundless mountain. If not for this, even if the majority of the infinite boundless mountain's forces were destroyed, we juniors would not be able to find where you wanted to go. Chapter 863. Dongfang Hui's heart jolted, her eyes flashing. Infinite boundless mountain's own people. Who is it? Lei Tingfeng smiled. Why ask when you already know the answer, madam? How many people under the heavens can know madame's thoughts? Dongfang Hui's face paled as she shook her head. It's her. No, impossible. Why would she do that? Seeing Dongfang Hui's expression, Lei Tingfeng couldn't help but feel a trace of joy in his heart. Although his father didn't want infinite boundless mountain's help, Lei Tingfeng still felt a little uncomfortable that infinite boundless mountain had chosen Mo Jingli over him back then. Now that he saw Dongfang Hui's misfortune, he naturally felt some joy in his heart. Why would she do that? Naturally, I'll have to ask Madame. Madame's beloved disciple. Dongfang Hui wasn't an impulsive and stupid person, and very quickly understood her current situation. Ignoring Lei Tingfeng's gloating, she looked at him calmly. Prince Genom of Gojoseon, how do you want to deal with me? This. Lei Tingfeng was a little hesitant. Enchanting's intention was to directly kill Dongfang Hui. With Dongfang Hui's personality, once she recovered, what awaited them would be her vicious revenge. Infinite boundless mountain had existed for hundreds of years, and was involved in many countries' politics. Although most of her power had already been destroyed, no one knew if she still had any secret forces in the dark. Most of the time, a single fatal blow was already enough. However, Lei Tingfeng couldn't help but think of something else. He needed someone to support him. These years he had tried his best, but his results were mediocre. Even Mo Jingli, whom he had always looked down on, was much more famous than him. He knew that he needed to completely familiarize himself with his own forces and subordinates. And Dongfang Hui's performance in Dechu State a few days ago was enough to prove that she was definitely a capable woman. With just a glance, Dongfang Hui knew that Lei Tingfeng was wavering. A dark light flashed in her eyes as Dongfang Hui said in a low voice, "Since things have come to this, Dongfang Hui will admit defeat. Dongfang Hui and infinite boundless mountain will be at your disposal." As expected, Lei Tingfeng's heart moved as he smiled mildly. Madame is indeed a heroine, able to let things go. Prince Rui. Su Qingchen, who was standing beside Lei Tingfeng, suddenly spoke with a smile. As soon as Su Qingchen opened her mouth, Dongfang Hui knew that she was in trouble. She secretly regretted that she had been too anxious to show goodwill to Lei Tingfeng, that she had forgotten that Su Qingchen was still in front of her. Before Su Qingchen could speak, Dongfang Hui said indifferently, "Since when did young Master Qingchen start to care about the affairs of the Zhennan mansion?" While Lei Tingfeng was somewhat moved by Dongfang Hui and the remnant powers of Infinite Boundless Mountain, he had not yet reached the point where he lost his head over them. Moreover, he had always admired and feared Su Qingchen, so he naturally couldn't embarrass Su Qingchen. Qingchen. Su Qingchen looked at Dongfang Hui, saying softly, "I just want to say, Prince, be careful. If you don't kill the snake, it will hurt you." Lei Tingfeng's heart shook and his mind became clear. Thinking of his royal father's fearful attitude towards Infinite Boundless Mountain, if even his royal father did not have the confidence to control Infinite Boundless Mountain, even willing to cooperate with King Ding's manor to destroy it, on what basis did he think that he would be able to control it? Not only would he not be of help to him, he would be inviting a wolf into the house. Thinking of this, Lei Tingfeng couldn't help but break out in a cold sweat. Father said that he still lacked experience, and it was indeed true. "Thank you for your reminder." Lei Tingfeng thanked him in a low voice. Hearing Lei Tingfeng's words, Dongfang Hui knew that the situation was hopeless. Her face ashen, she glared hatefully at Su Qingchen. "Su Qingchen, what enmity do I have with you that you want to harm me like this?" Because of Su Qingchen, Dongfang Yu had to mess up her plan and marry Mo Jingli. Dongfang Hui didn't believe that Su Qingchen had nothing to do with it. Afterwards, Su Qingchen had personally gone south, assisting the Xiling army in breaking Infinite Boundless Mountain's mountain protecting Grand Formation, causing Infinite Boundless Mountain to cease to exist. Now, Su Qingchen's casual words had cut off her chance of survival. It could be said that Infinite Boundless Mountain had been defeated by Su Qingchen alone. Dongfang Hui really wanted to ask, what enmity did Infinite Boundless Mountain have with Su Qingchen in her previous life? Su Qingchen smiled mildly. "You worry too much, madam. It's just that our standpoints are different." Dongfang Hui was a threat to the Prince Ding mansion. If they could get rid of her, why would they leave her behind? Such an understatement made Dongfang Hui so angry that her eyes turned red. Staring at Su Qingchen, Dongfang Hui's lips moved, about to say something when with a whoosh, a silver light shot through the air. Dongfang Hui's chest instantly blossomed with a beautiful flower of blood. Dongfang Hui lowered her head, staring fixedly at the arrow that had pierced through her chest. Under the sunlight, the silver arrow was still stained with Dongfang Hui's blood, emitting a cold light. Dongfang Hui lowered her head, her eyes filled with pain, unwillingness and loss. Su Qingchen's voice sounded mildly, "Even if I didn't stop you, madam should know that you would definitely not be able to leave this place. This way of dying to madam is actually more painful than dying at the hands of the Xiling army." Dongfang Hui's lips twitched as if she wanted to squeeze out a smile. Unfortunately, she no longer had any strength left, and the color in her eyes gradually faded, finally becoming dull and lifeless. Lei Tingfeng and Su Qingchen stood side by side, looking at the woman lying in a pool of blood. After a long time he sighed, "Young Master Qingchen's mercy really makes one unable to enjoy it. There's a saying that is really true. A woman's heart is the most poisonous." Su Qingchen smiled mildly, raising his head. "Since the matter of Infinite Boundless Mountain is settled, I will be returning to Glass City. Duke Rui, please bid farewell to Genom of Gojoseon on my behalf." Lei Tingfeng was shocked. "Young master is leaving just like that?" Su Qingchen smiled. "With mundane matters bothering me, I indeed have no time to linger." Lei Tingfeng struggled a little in his heart, whether or not to detain Su Qingchen. But seeing the bright smile of the man in front of him, and the imposing aura of the guards standing behind him, he decided to give up. Lei Tingfeng still decisively gave up on this idea, smiling as he cupped his hands. "If that's the case, I won't see you off." Su Qingchen smiled. "Duke Rui, you don't have to be so courteous. Farewell." Jiangnan in the regent's manor. In a somewhat cold and dark room, Dongfang Yu sat alone, lost in thought. If someone was beside her at this moment, they would definitely be able to see that her beautiful eyes, which seemed to be filled with emotion, were now completely red, evidently having just gone through a painful experience. Her beautiful face was filled with haggard and worry, as well as a trace of ruthlessness and decisiveness. Knock knock. A series of soft knocks sounded from outside. Dongfang Yu, however, seemed to be shocked, abruptly standing up, staring at the door. Who is it? Madam. An anxious voice sounded from outside. Dongfang Yu was shocked, quickly rushing to the door and opening it. What happened to Madam? The woman at the door said with tears in her eyes. Madam was killed by Lei Tingfeng and Su Qingchen by the Cloud Water River. An infinite boundless mountain. Infinite boundless mountain is also finished. Chapter 864. Master. Dongfang Yu murmured softly as if she was about to collapse. The girl beside her hurriedly supported her, saying worriedly, Madam has passed away, and the elders have also been killed by Lei Tingfeng. Infinite boundless mountain can only rely on Miss now. Miss, you have to pull yourself together. Dongfang Yu waved her hands, saying somewhat helplessly, I know, you can leave first. I want to be alone for a while. Tell them to come see me tomorrow. The girl looked worriedly at Dongfang Yu, but still sighed and left sadly. With Madam and the elders suddenly killed, the heavy responsibility of infinite boundless mountain could only fall on Mississippi. But thinking of Mrs. Personality, after dismissing the girl who came to report, Dongfang Yu slowly closed the door. The room returned to its previous darkness, and Dongfang Yu threw herself on the bed, crying softly. She was adopted by Dongfang Hui, and her master had raised her from a young age, teaching her how to read and write, teaching her martial arts, teaching her strategy. But now, Master, don't blame you. I hate Mo Jingli. Why did you force me? You love you are the most, don't blame me. When Dongfang Yu received the news of Dongfang Hui's death, Mo Jingli naturally received the news as well. In contrast to Dongfang Yu's grief, Mo Jingli was full of joy. Although it had only been a few months, Mo Jingli had long since grown tired of Dongfang Hui's control and command of him. This was completely different from what he had originally imagined. If Dongfang Hui still didn't die, he would probably become a puppet one day. But it was completely different if it was Dongfang Yu. Dongfang Yu was extremely intelligent, but she was much easier to deal with than Dongfang Hui. And Mo Jingli could feel Dongfang Hui's increasing desire for power, while Dongfang Yu herself did not have much interest in power. Mo Jingli believed that in time he could definitely borrow Dongfang Yu's hand to control the power of infinite boundless mountain. Although most of them had been wiped out by Genom of Gojoseon, the remaining portion was still considerable. At least within Jiangnan, Mo Jingli had absolute control over everything. When Mo Jingli hurried to Dongfang Yu's room, he heard sobs coming from inside. He couldn't help but frown. He pushed the door open and entered. Princess, Dongfang Yu suddenly sat up and glanced at Mo Jingli like a knife. He said unhappily, What are you doing here? Mo Jingli ignored her anger and walked into the room. He raised his eyebrows and smiled. Why are you crying? Are you crying for your master? Dongfang Yu wiped his tears and stared at him coldly. What do you want to say? Or do you think that I will be afraid of you just because master is dead? Looking at her, Mo Jingli said, Not only is your master dead, your infinite boundless mountain is finished as well. Dongfang Yu, do you think I still need to be polite to you? Dongfang Yu laughed coldly. How can the power of my infinite boundless mountain be finished so easily? Even the power of the West Hill and the Prince Ding mansion is finished. Mo Jingli, believe it or not, I will crush you to death right now. Mo Jingli's eyes flashed and he stared at Dongfang Yu vigilantly. He knew that Dongfang Yu was not joking. The biggest difference between this woman and her master was that she did not know how to weigh the pros and cons. This kind of woman was even more dangerous. If he angered her, she could really kill him. Although Mo Jingli lost face because he couldn't beat a woman, Mo Jingli still had to admit that Dongfang Yu's martial arts were not bad. It could be said that she was the woman with the highest martial arts that he had ever seen. She was even more powerful than Yi Li and Leng Luyue of the Yanwang Chamber of Commerce. His eyes darkening, Mo Jingli smiled calmly. You don't have to be like this. I don't mean to embarrass you. Dongfang Yu snorted coldly. Obviously she did not care. Mo Jingli looked at her and whispered, I know what you are thinking. We can cooperate. Dongfang Yu was stunned and looked at him suspiciously. Mo Jingli said without changing his expression, You still can't forget Su Qingchen, right? It doesn't matter. As long as you cooperate with me, I can help you get him. Dongfang Yu said disdainfully. Mo Jingli's eyes flashed with a trace of displeasure when he was looked down upon by her, but he was not angry. Since I dare to say so, I naturally have the confidence and ability. It just depends on whether you want it or not. Maybe. Young Master Qinchin is not so important in your heart? Then you should obediently stay in the Prince Regent's mansion as a princess consort. This prince will not treat you unfairly. However, young Master Qinchin has already passed the age limit. No matter what, he will be getting married in 2 years. At that time, there will be a beautiful woman by his side. Shut up. Dongfang Yu said angrily. Mo Jingli raised his eyebrows and looked at her. After a long time, Dongfang Yu said in a low voice, I will cooperate with you. Outside the door, a white figure quietly left. In the courtyard of the Prince Regent's Rong Fei, Ying indifferently handed a letter to the delicate girl beside her. Have someone give this letter to Madame Yaoji of the Marquis Muyang's mansion. Not long after, a gray figure came out and went out of the mansion. Chapter 865. In the northern camp at Lingjiao Mountain, Yili sat calmly in her tent and browsed through the battle reports and memorials sent in from various places. A few days ago, Helian Peng had suffered a few small losses at their hands and did not come to challenge them again. The two armies were at peace, but Mo Xiuyao's side had fought 2 battles and completely suppressed the northern tribe's army's arrogance. This caused the soldiers under Yi Li and Lu Jingxian to become restless. Lu Jingxian's side was still fine, but Yi Li's side still had to guard against Lei Zhenting's troops at the rear and could not act rashly. This caused the eyes of the soldiers to turn red as they listened to the reports sent in every day. Princess, General Zhou, General Sun, General He and the others request an audience. Qin Feng came in and reported with a smile. Yi Li put down the battle reports in her hands and smiled. They're here to ask for battle again? Qin Feng nodded and smiled. These days we've been guarding and not coming out. They must be bored. Yi Li thought and said, let them in. This subordinate obeys. Hearing Yi Li's words, even Qin Feng's eyes lit up. Even though he could not personally charge onto the battlefield, he could still drink some soup when others ate meat. The generals were not the only ones who were suffocated. After a while, He Su, Zhou Min and the others filed in and bowed to Yi Li. Greetings to Princess. Yi Li smiled and said, there's no need to be so courteous. Generals, why are you here instead of staying in your respective camps? Sun Yaowu was the first to speak, reporting to the princess, this subordinate requests for battle. Yi Li raised an eyebrow and looked at him with a smile but did not speak. Sun Yaowu was in awe of this young princess Yi Li. Being looked at like this, he felt embarrassed and said uneasily, Princess, we've been guarding here and watching others fight. It's really frustrating. Wouldn't that affect the morale of the soldiers? Yi Li nodded and said, that makes sense. What do you think? Hearing this, the eyes of all the generals present lit up. Sun Yaowu smiled and said, this subordinate is willing to be the vanguard and take down Luo State City while they are unprepared. He Su and Zhou Min had known him for some time, and they knew that the loss of Luo State City was a sore point in his heart, so they didn't try to snatch the credit from him. He Su said in a low voice, this subordinate is willing to hold the line for General Sunday. Zhou Min also smiled. This subordinate is willing to guard Spirit Vulture Mountain. Spirit Vulture Mountain definitely needed someone to guard it. Zhou Min was not in a hurry. As long as the battle started, would there be a lack of battles to fight? You guys are of one mind. The 3 of them looked at each other and smiled. Then they all looked at Yi Li. Yi Li tapped her index finger on the table a few times. She pondered for a moment and said, send me your plan first. The 3 of them were overjoyed and said in unison, this subordinate obeys. This subordinate will take his leave. After saying that, they rushed out the door to gather the troops without waiting for Yi Li's signal. Yi Li and the other 2's figures disappeared from the door of the tent. She couldn't help but shake her head with a smile. Then she instructed Qin Feng behind her, let Qilin prepare. Since we are going to take down Luo State City, there cannot be any mistakes. That Helian Peng is also not easy to deal with. Qin Feng replied, this subordinate obeys. Luo State City was not very eye-catching in the entire Dechu state. It was not a stronghold located at the border, nor was it a famous city in Dechu state. However, it had a rather troublesome aspect. Normal cities were easy to defend and hard to attack, but Luo State City was easy to attack and hard to defend. because it was quite far from the border. Although the northern tribes had repeatedly invaded the border, they had never truly broken through the border. As a result, although the cities near the border were built to be impregnable, this unremarkable Luozhou city was barely able to build a city wall. It was as good as not having a city wall. The northern tribes' army could even break through the border cities, so a mere Luo state city was naturally nothing to them. Hence, when Luo state fell, Sun Yaowu could not be blamed for not being able to defend the city. Even if Sun Yaowu was the reincarnation of Sun Wu, and Bai Qi was reborn, they would only be defeated. When the Mahist army deployed their troops, although Luo State City was very close to Spirit Vulture Mountain, the Mahist army did not have enough troops. Furthermore, Luo State City was easy to attack and hard to defend. Taking it down was not difficult, but defending it was extremely difficult. In the end, they could only be caught in a tug-of-war with the northern tribes' army. Hence, the Mahist army did not bother about him. The reason why Yili agreed to Sun Yaowu's request was because Emo Shiyao had already pushed the northern tribes' army back. They naturally had to cooperate to chase Helian Peng's army out. As for how they would defend Luo State City after taking it down, the Mahist army was not the same as the Dechu State army. Even if Helian Peng wanted to snatch it from them, he would have to see if it was worth it. Luo State City was not a good place to station troops. Helian Peng's army was naturally not stationed in Luo State City, but only a portion of them. Under the night sky, the entire city was silent, with only the occasional flicker of light. In these 2 years, the people in the north had either died or fled. It could be said that less than 10% of them were still alive. Although it was not too late, Luo State City was already immersed in darkness. Under the cover of the night, a group of men in black neatly climbed up the non-existent city wall and quickly disappeared into the night. In a secluded place not far from Luo State City, Sun Yaowu was pacing back and forth anxiously under the night sky of the city. Qin Feng, who was standing beside him, leaned lazily against a tree and smiled. "General Sun, what are you doing?" Sun Yaowu frowned. "If we hide here, what if they alert the guards of Luo State City and attract the reinforcements of the northern tribes? Wouldn't all our efforts be for naught?" Qin Feng smiled. "General Sun, don't worry. If it was Glass City, Chu Capital, or Enchanting, we might have to be more careful. In a place like Luo State City, if they could alert the guards, they would not be able to survive." Although Sun Yaowu had long heard of Qi Lin's reputation, he had never seen it for himself. He asked suspiciously, "Commander Qin, are you that confident?" Qin Feng raised his eyebrows and said with a smile, "Of course. If my subordinates can't even have confidence in them, who can trust them? General Sun, don't you also believe in your subordinates?" Sun Yaowu smiled. "That's true. I would also like to see how powerful the Qi Lin of the Mahist army is." Qin Feng smiled. "General Sun, just wait and see." In less than half an hour, Luo State City was filled with green signal fireworks. Sun Yaowu was stunned. "That's it?" Qin Feng smiled. "General Sun, please." When Sun Yaowu arrived at Luo State City with his troops, he saw that the city gates were open and the city was in a state of chaos. However, there were only a few northern tribe soldiers who could mount the city walls to defend against their attack. In less than an hour, they had already taken down Luo State City. When Sun Yaowu stood on the city walls again, he was still in a daze. If Luo State City could be taken down so easily, what was he thinking about for the past 2 years? Chapter 866. Looking at his complicated expression that seemed to be both happy and sad, Qin Feng said with a smile, "General Sun, do not take it to heart. Wang Fei said before that Luozhou is easy to attack but hard to defend. From a military perspective, there is no value in its existence. No matter who it is easy to break through. Therefore, the loss of Luozhou was not General's fault." Sun Yaowu leaned against the city wall. Hearing Qin Feng's words, he suddenly couldn't help but cry. In reality, how could he not know that the loss of Luozhou was fated? But as a general, because of his loss, countless people of Luozhou had died. Sun Yaowu did not know what other people thought, but he could not pass the barrier in his heart. If he had not encountered the Mahist army and Princess Ding, Sun Yaowu would have either died of depression and regret for the rest of his life, or become a bandit. It was also because of this that Sun Yaowu respected and trusted Yili. Not only because Yili had given him trust, but also because Yili had given him new hope in life. Qin Feng looked calmly at Sun Yaowu and did not try to persuade him. Wang Fei was right. While Sun Yaowu did not care about small matters, he was a rare general with a conscience. After waiting for Sun Yaowu to vent his accumulated emotions, Qin Feng went forward to pat his shoulder and said with a smile, "All right, get up if you've cried enough. The war has only just begun." Sun Yaowu was a little embarrassed to see a big man crying in front of others. Roughly wiping away his tears, Sun Yaowu forced himself to ignore Qin Feng's half-smile and said, "I, old Sun, usually think that I am very daring, but isn't Wang Fei's plan too risky? If Helian Ping does not fall for it and does not come to save Luo Zhou, then Wang Fei will be in trouble." Qin Feng rubbed his chin and thought, Wang Fei said that Helian Ping will definitely come. But Her Highness said that this place has no strategic significance at all, Sun Yaowu said. Qin Feng smiled and said, "Even if that's the case, by standing in Luo State City, it's the same as stabbing a nail into Helian Peng's back. Moreover, the princess consort said that he couldn't afford to lose face like this. Therefore he will definitely come." From the very beginning, Helian Peng had repeatedly provoked Princess Ding. One could tell that he was an extremely prideful person. Furthermore, he could not tolerate his own failure. Therefore he would never allow the Mahist army to occupy a piece of land in his territory, especially when she had taken it back from him. Sun Yaowu scratched his head and nodded. "That makes sense." Qin Feng smiled and said, "General Sun should prepare to defend the city. Once the reinforcements from the northern tribes arrive, things will not be easy for us." Sun Yaowu nodded seriously and said, "Don't worry, I will definitely not let the northern tribes take Luo State City from my hands again." The news of Luo State City being occupied by the Mahist army naturally reached Helian Peng's camp very quickly. The generals under him all said that they would immediately send out troops to take back Luo State City. These northern tribe soldiers could be said to be invincible ever since they entered the Central Plains. Even though they had not been able to advance much after encountering the Mahist army last year, overall, they had not suffered any losses. Especially the soldiers in the camp near Spirit Vulture Mountain. They had never encountered the main forces of the Mahist army before. Unknowingly, they began to have a feeling that the Mahist army was just SOSO. At this moment, when they heard that the Luo State City that they had occupied had been silently attacked by the Mahist army, how could they bear it? Naturally, they all clamored to take back Luo State City. Helian Ping was not in a hurry. Although the Mahist army's sudden attack on Luo State City had indeed surprised him, these few days of fighting with the Mahist army had made him much more cautious. "If you want to take back Luo State City, we can do so at any time. However, why would Yili want to take over Luo State City now? Luo State City is still some distance away from Spirit Vulture Mountain. Even if she takes it over, she will not be able to link it with the place she is defending. Instead, she will need to eliminate more people to defend it. Logically speaking, Yili would not make such an unwise decision." Helian Ping said in a low voice. One of his deputies twitched his mouth in disdain and said, "That Princess Ding is just a woman, how can she know how to fight? However, no matter what, we cannot let the Mahist army look down on our northern tribes' warriors." Helian Peng's eyes flashed as his lips curled into a cold smile and said, "Since that is the case, how about Deputy Cha lead the troops to take back Luo State City?" The deputy immediately accepted the order and said, "This general guarantees that we will take back Luo State City before tomorrow morning." Helian Ping declined to comment and said indifferently, "Wait until you take it back. When the time comes, this general will help you ask His Highness the Seventh Prince for a reward." Although the deputy had a rough temperament, he could still hear the disapproval in Helian Peng's voice. He couldn't help but stare blankly for a moment before accepting the order and turning to leave. After the deputy left, Helian Ping swept his gaze over the people below and said in a cold voice, "Immediately go and find out where Yili is." The others were all startled. One of them stepped forward and asked, "General, are you suspecting that Princess Ding is attacking Luo State City because she is plotting something?" Although Helian Ping had just arrived not long ago and was directly ordered by Yelu Yi to take charge of Spirit Vulture Mountain's main camp, his ruthless and fierce methods made many of the officers revere him. No one dared to look down on him because he was still young and had never led an army before. Helian Ping nodded and said, "That's right. Rashly attacking a place that isn't of much use isn't Yi Li's style." The other officers didn't agree. How could they know Princess Ding's style of conduct? However, Hellion Peng's orders couldn't be discounted. Everyone hurriedly left to carry out the order. Plot? This consort is clearly plotting something. Outside Spirit Vulture Mountain, Yili looked down at the distant mountains and rivers with a smile. Behind her stood Zhuojing and Lin Han, as well as Zhou Min, who was guarding Spirit Vulture Mountain. Zhou Min asked curiously, "Princess, will Hellion Peng really fall for it?" Yili smiled faintly and said, "This isn't a question of whether Hellion Peng will fall for it. Even if he knows there's a problem, he can only follow the path we've planned. Otherwise, he's prepared to give up the 3 cities near Spirit Vulture Mountain to us." Zhou Min was silent for a while. She frowned and said, "Princess has sent General Sun to take Luozhou City and General He to take Huiyun City. Even if Hellion Peng is willing to give up Luozhou, he definitely won't give up Huiyun City. He will definitely send reinforcements there. But if he does that, Hellion Peng will know that our army is empty. What if he—" Yili turned to look at Zhou Min. She sighed helplessly and said, "If that's the case, then we can only rely on General Zhou." The Mahist army didn't have many soldiers, but it was a shortcoming. Counting them, the Spirit Vulture Mountain camp had about 30 soldiers. However, there were less than 100,000 Mahist army elites. They were all remnants of the Dechu state and Hisu's soldiers. Hisu's soldiers were considered good compared to the other generals of the Dechu state. However, if it was one-on-one, they still couldn't be compared to the northern tribes. However, this couldn't be blamed on Hisu. Chapter 867. Zhou Min hesitated and whispered, "Princess, why doesn't the prince recruit more troops from the northwest?" The military service system in the northwest was slightly different from the other countries. Therefore, the ability to recruit new soldiers was much stronger than the other countries. Femo Shuyao was willing he could recruit more than 1 million new soldiers at any time. Moreover, these new soldiers were different from the new recruits. They had more or less received some training. This was somewhat similar to the northern tribes. However, the northern tribes practiced martial arts because of their customs. The northwest was because of the military service system. Every man had to serve in the military for 2 years before they were crowned at the age of 16. Yili smiled and shook her head. Although the northern tribes are brave, they are not enough to compete with the Prince Ding mansion. In the next few years, I'm afraid that the world will not be peaceful. If all the manpower and resources are used up, what will happen in the future? I see. Zhou Min knew that he did not consider as many things as the prince and princess. He only needed to go forward and fight with the enemy. Since Princess Ding said this, he naturally didn't ask any more questions. Princess Hellion Peng just sent 100,000 soldiers to Hui City. A man in black came forward to report. Yili nodded and said, "I know. You can leave." After dismissing the man who reported, Yili thought and said, Hellion Peng should have more than 400,000 soldiers under his command. He went to reinforce Luozhou and Hui City. He should have at least 200,000 soldiers under his command. Zhou Min's expression was somewhat solemn as she said in a deep voice, "Wang Fei, the number of troops in our hands is indeed less than 150,000. Yili waved her hand and said, "It doesn't matter. Give up the other 2 camps and only defend the central army. Spirit Vulture Mountain is rugged and easy to defend. As long as we can defend for half a month, it will be enough for Hisu to take Hui City. Even if it doesn't work, I will inform General Yuan Pei. Once Spirit Vulture Mountain falls, he will immediately lead troops out of Feihong Pass to block the way of the northern tribes' army. Although it was risky, if it succeeded, Hisu would occupy Hui City and Sun Yao would occupy Luozhou. They would form a triangle with Spirit Vulture Mountain and surround Hellion Peng's army. At that time, Hellion Peng would have no choice but to retreat. I understand. I swear to defend Spirit Vulture Mountain. But, Princess, please move to Feihong Pass first?" After thinking about it, Zhou Min asked. It was not that he did not believe that Wang Fei would live and die with the soldiers, but with Wang Fei's status, there was no need for her to take such a risk. Yili nodded and said, "No, I believe that General Zhou can defend Spirit Vulture Mountain." Since Yili said so, Zhou Min couldn't persuade her anymore. He could only secretly make up his mind that he absolutely could not allow Hellion Peng to take even half a step into Spirit Vulture Mountain. If she really could not take it, she would send the princess to Feihong Pass even if she had to use force. Soon the area around Spirit Vulture Mountain fell into chaos. Just as Yili and Zhou Min expected, Helian Ping did not personally rescue Hui City and Luozhou. Instead, he gathered the remaining 200,000 soldiers to attack Spirit Vulture Mountain. In the east, LV Jinxian's troops were in a stalemate for a long time, unable to break through. The middle troops, Yelu Yi and Helian Zhen, together led more than 800,000 troops, but they were still no match for Mo Xiuyao's less than 500,000 troops. After fighting for half a month, they lost more than they won. Helpless, they could only retreat. If Helian Peng could open a path from Spirit Vulture Mountain, it would naturally solve the Northern Tribes' army's current predicament. More importantly, winter came early in the north and it was coming soon. By then, the Northern Tribes' army's supplies would be even more strained than now. Therefore, although Helian Ping knew that Yi Li's arrangement would be disadvantageous to him, he had no choice but to attack Spirit Vulture Mountain with all his might. In front of Spirit Vulture Mountain, both sides had fought for 5 days and both sides had suffered heavy casualties. However, neither side had the slightest intention of retreating. In comparison, this time the Mahist army was at a disadvantage. At this time, the Mahist army's battle strength was not as good as the Northern Tribes' army. In terms of numbers, they could not compare to the Northern Tribes' army. If not for Spirit Vulture Mountain being easy to defend and hard to attack, the Mahist army would have been defeated long ago. Even so, Helian Peng was not in a better position than Yi Li and Zhou Min. Although his casualties were less than the Mahist army, he only had 200,000 soldiers under his command. Furthermore, the reinforcements he sent to Luozhou and Hui City had not returned. If the casualties continued, even if he wiped out the entire army at Spirit Vulture Mountain, his remaining soldiers would not be enough to be trampled by the Mahist army at Fei Hong Pass. At that time, both sides would suffer heavy losses. The worst thing was that Yi Li could afford to be injured. She still had Yuan Pei and the defenders of Fei Hong Pass behind her. However, Helian Ping could not afford to be injured. Once Luozhou and Hui City were completely lost, even if he took Spirit Vulture Mountain, he would not dare to go there. Once he went there, he would really become an isolated army. Yi Li. Standing in front of the army, looking at the tired soldiers everywhere, Helian Ping could not help but grit his teeth. His eyes were filled with a fanatical look. As expected of Princess Ding. I still fell into your trap. But, did you count your own life into this as well? Looking at the black flag of the Mahist army fluttering in the wind on Spirit Vulture Mountain, Helian Ping laughed coldly. Since things have already come to this, if this general doesn't take down your Spirit Vulture Mountain, wouldn't others laugh at this general's incompetence? General. A general hurried over to wait for orders. Helian Ping raised his eyes and stared at the hillside not far away. He said in a deep voice, "Continue to attack Spirit Vulture Mountain. You are not allowed to stop until you take it down." The general was stunned. He said with some difficulty, "General, Spirit Vulture Mountain is easy to defend and hard to attack." "I'm afraid." Helian Peng's cold gaze swept over, causing the general to swallow the words that were about to come out of his mouth. Helian Peng stared at him and said in a deep voice, "Anyone who dares to retreat will be executed." Yes. On Spirit Vulture Mountain they were also waiting for battle. The atmosphere was filled with blood and tension. Lin Han followed behind Yi Li and followed her to patrol the front line outside the camp. Looking at the groups of soldiers resting together, among which there were many who were injured and could not be treated in time, Lin Han could not help but frown. He looked worriedly at Yi Li, who was walking in front of him. He wanted to persuade her to leave earlier, but he could not say anything. Seeing Yi Li coming over, the soldiers who were resting on the ground all wanted to stand up and salute her. Yi Li waved her hand to signal them not to move. She walked to a soldier whose left arm was covered in blood and leaned against a pile of grass to rest. She asked softly, "What happened? Why aren't you bandaging your wound?" That soldier looked to be around 17 or 18 years old. Seeing Yi Li ask him, he blushed slightly and shook his head. In reply to Princess, "My wound is not serious. It's just a scratch. There's no need to bandage it." Yi Li squatted down and raised a hand to pull up his sleeve. The wound was indeed not serious. It was not a fatal wound, but he had lost quite a bit of blood. If it was a normal day, it would not be a problem. However, in the current situation, if he used any force, the wound would probably open even more. Yi Li frowned. She took out a bottle and sprinkled some medicine on his wound. Behind her, Lin Han handed over a cloth towel. Yi Li took it and neatly bandaged the wound. Chapter 868. Looking at the woman in white who was bandaging his wound, the young soldier was stunned. However, he saw that the princess seemed to be very familiar with it. In a moment, the wound was bandaged better than the ones he had seen in the army. Looking at the dazed young soldier, Yili smiled faintly and said, "How old are you? Are you afraid?" The youth shook his head and said firmly, "I'm not afraid." He was still a little afraid. However, the princess was a woman and she was not afraid. As a man, how could he be afraid? Yili patted his shoulder and said, "Rest well. There will be a tough battle to fight later." Standing up, Yili turned and said to Lin Han, "There is no lack of medicine in the camp. Let the army doctor distribute some medicine to the soldiers. For some of the injuries that are not too serious, let everyone help each other bandage the wounds." "Yes, princess." Lin Han nodded and pulled a passing soldier to pass on the order. Then he followed behind Yili. Seeing him like this, Yili said helplessly, "I won't be in any danger in the army camp. You don't have to follow me everywhere." Lin Han shook his head and said, "The prince has instructed that the princess must have someone to protect her." Yili also knew that she could not convince him, so she could only let him go. Just as she was about to turn and leave, she heard a painful groan not far away. Yili frowned and turned to walk in that direction. It was a simple shed for the seriously injured. Inside the shed, two doctors were discussing something with a young soldier. The groan came from the soldier's mouth. In fact, the cold weapons battlefield in ancient times was far crueler than in her previous life. Naturally, there were no professional field doctors or field nurses to save the wounded on the battlefield. Usually, those who were seriously injured could not escape death in the chaos of war. Occasionally, there would be those who were lucky enough to survive the battle and not be killed by the enemy. They would be dragged back by their own people. But even so, the death rate of the seriously injured who were rescued was shockingly high. It was also because of this that there were not many people who were disabled on the battlefield. "How are your injuries?" Yili asked softly. The two doctors turned around and reported helplessly, "The arrowhead is stuck in the bone, I'm afraid." The arrowhead couldn't be pulled out. Although it was the leg that was injured, sooner or later the person would die because of the wound festering and other reasons. Yili lowered her head to look at the young man lying on the bed. His wound had turned green and was beginning to fester. His young eyes were filled with despair and pain. Yili's heart sank. She thought for a moment and asked, "Is amputation okay?" "Amputation?" The two doctors were stunned, but they quickly understood what Yili meant. He said with some difficulty, "If we cut off this leg, there may be a chance for survival. As long as the wound doesn't fester, there shouldn't be a problem. It's just that not everyone could do such a thing." Although they were doctors, they had never done such a thing. There was another experienced military doctor in the camp, but a few days ago he fell seriously ill due to exhaustion and was sent back to Feihong Pass. Yili pondered for a moment and said lightly, "I'll do it, princess." Not only the two doctors but even Lin Han was shocked. Yili said calmly, "Don't worry, I'll do it." As a special forces soldier in her previous life, Yili had naturally learned battlefield rescue. Not only did she treat external injuries, but she had also performed general battlefield surgery. Amputation happened to be one of the most common ones. The two doctors were still a little hesitant. Although they couldn't save the wounded man, they couldn't watch the princess do it. The wounded man might be able to live for a few more days. If the princess did it, he might die on the spot. Yili walked in front of the young man and said softly, "I'm going to cut off your leg that was shot by the arrow. Don't be afraid." A trace of fear rose in the young man's eyes. He wanted to shake his head with difficulty, but the pain from his leg made him unable to say a word. Yili looked at him and said in a deep voice, "Your life is more important than a leg. It's already like this. Are you going to give up your life if you don't even want to gamble? In your home? Is there anyone waiting for you to go back?" The young man's eyes were a little dazed, as if he had thought of something. A trace of hope and anger slowly appeared in his eyes. Yili said softly, "As long as you want to live, you must do your best, even if you have to hold on until the last moment." The young man finally nodded. Although there was still fear in his eyes, he was no longer so flustered. Yili stood up and ordered the two doctors beside her, "Prepare painkillers, hemostatic medicine, clean hot water, strong wine, clean towels and fire." The two doctors had no choice but to prepare the things according to Yili's orders. When everything was ready, Yili took out a thin knife that she had never used before. After wiping it with alcohol, she placed it on the fire for a while before standing next to the young man. She aimed the knife at a certain part of the young man's leg and made a cut. The two doctors who were standing on the side stared at Yili's movements with wide eyes. They saw that she cut cleanly but with a sense of propriety. At the beginning she was a little unfamiliar, but after 2 or 3 cuts she seemed to gradually get the hang of it. It looked like she was even cleaner than the experienced military doctors. As Yili was busy, the sound of war drums suddenly came from outside. In the distance, there was the unique sound of the bugle horn of the northern tribes. It was obvious that the northern tribes' army had started to attack again. Lin Han said worriedly, "Princess." Yili did not even raise her head. Her hands did not slow down at all as she ordered, "Go and tell Zhou Min that everything will be under his command. I will be out soon." Lin Han looked at the injured person on the bed who was in a semi-conscious state and finally turned around to leave. Yili finally stopped moving the knife in her hand. She neatly picked up the thread that had been boiled in hot water to suture the wound and bandaged it. After doing all this, Yili raised her head and let out a sigh of relief. The two doctors standing on the side were already lost in thought. When they saw Yili raise her head to look at them, they came back to their senses and said, "Princess." Yili put down the things in her hand and washed her hands in the basin on the side. She said, "The two of you are taking good care of him. The two of you should know more about medicine to clear heat, detoxify, and reduce inflammation than I do. His wound should not be exposed to water. If nothing happens in the next few days, there should be no problem. I will go out first." "Yes. Farewell, Princess." "Don't worry, Princess. This subordinate will take good care of him." The two doctors were a little embarrassed as they repeatedly promised. Yili did not care about anything else. She turned and went out of the shed to the battlefield. On the battlefield, Helian Ping did not see Yili's figure in the distance. He could not help but frown. He raised his voice and said, "What? Princess Ding was finally afraid and left early?" When he said this, Helian Peng's heart was a little complicated. He did not know whether he hoped that Yili had left or that she had not left. Zhou Min snorted and said in a deep voice, "Where our princess is it something that you, a barbarian of the northern tribes, can control?" Chapter 869. Helian Peng's expression darkened and he sneered. This general had thought that Ding Wangfei, whose name shook the world, was some kind of heroine. It turns out that she is just a cowardly woman who fled in the face of battle. I can't be bothered to talk nonsense with a northern tribes barbarian like you. If you want to fight, then let's fight. Zhou Min pointed her spear at Helian Peng. Helian Peng laughed, "That's good. I'll kill you and then look for your Princess Ding. Charge." After saying that, Helian Peng led the charge up the hill without waiting for the war drums. The soldiers behind him saw their general leading the charge and naturally did not hesitate to charge towards the front of the Mahist army. Zhou Min didn't retreat and snorted, "Kill him." The Mahist army roared as they released arrows and threw huge logs and rocks. They charged towards the northern tribes' army mercilessly. The northern tribes' army had been attacking for 5 to 6 days and had more or less gathered some experience. This time there were actually quite a few people who managed to avoid the stones, logs, and arrows raining down from above and rushed up. The Mahist army soldiers charged down without hesitation. The two armies immediately clashed and killed each other. Helian Peng relied on his profound martial arts to fly in Zhou Min's direction. The archers in front did not hesitate to change their target and shot towards Helian Peng, who was in midair. The Mahist army's Black Cloud cavalry were known for their archery skills. Even Helian Peng did not dare to take on dozens of arrows head-on. He flipped in the air and avoided the rain of arrows. He waved his sword and fell back a lot before landing on the ground. Helian Peng laughed and said, "Good archery skills. I would like to experience the archery skills of the Mahist army." Before he finished his sentence, he charged towards Zhou Min again. His qinggong was excellent and his speed was fast. In a moment he was already a few feet away from Zhou Min. He waved his sword and swung it towards the archers. A sharp sword aura rushed towards them. The archers reacted quickly and dodged the attack. However, 2 of them were still injured. Helian Peng did not care about them and turned to attack Zhou Min. Arrows were long-range weapons, but they were useless in close combat. Zhou Min was not afraid. She raised her spear and stabbed it towards Helian Peng. Helian Peng laughed, General Zhou, you lead the troops well. Unfortunately, your martial arts are still lacking. Zhou Min said coldly, General Helian, you talk too much nonsense. Helian Ping laughed, is that so? Since that is the case, then let me experience General Zhou's martial arts. Zhou Min was a general who received orders to go to war, not a Jianghu expert who fought alone. Compared to Helian Ping, her martial arts skills were naturally inferior. At this time, Yi Li, He Su and Sun Yaowu were not present. The battle ahead was being commanded by Quan Nai and Zhou Min alone. This made him unable to fully concentrate on the enemy. After a few rounds, it was obvious that he was on the losing end. Is he? If she is not here, then you will die today. Zhou Min snorted. She did not care about the cut on her arm. She raised her spear and stabbed it again. Helian Ping jumped up. If that is the case, then it is a pity. My northern tribes does not have many generals like General Zhou. His long saber emitted a dark red light under the sun. It slashed towards Zhou Min's neck. Zing! A black shadow flashed. Lin Han's face was cold. He raised his sword to block Helian Peng's saber. He said coldly, if General Helian wants to experience the archery skills of the Mahist army, why are you so impatient? Helian Peng was startled. He felt a strong wind behind his head. He quickly turned around and dodged. A black arrow just happened to brush past him. The power of this arrow was different from the previous archers. Even if it did not hit him and just brushed past his face, he still felt a slight pain on his face. General Helian is really impatient. This consort is surprised that you would take the lead. Yi Li stood not far away. She looked at Helian Ping with an indifferent expression. Helian Ping laughed loudly. He looked at Yi Li and said, so Princess is still in the army. This general has misunderstood Princess. Yi Li calmly said, don't worry. Since the general is here, there is no harm in staying a little longer. General Zhou, you can go do what you need to do. Zhou Min looked at Yi Li and Helian Peng. She knew that she could not interfere here. She nodded and turned to leave. Helian Ping raised his eyebrows and smiled. Princess Ding wants this general to stay. This general is honored. Yi Li was not in a good mood. She did not joke around with Helian Ping. She calmly said, that would be for the best. She waved her hand and several arrows shot towards Helian Ping from all directions. Helian Ping hurriedly leaped forward. He swung his blade to cut down the arrows that were shooting towards him. He did not think that just as he cut down the arrows, a strong wind would come from behind him. Even though Helian Ping relied on his strong internal energy to avoid being hit, he was still in a difficult situation. So powerful. Just now, the rain of arrows from the dozen archers did not pose any threat to Helian Ping. But now, the rain of arrows that were not concentrated caused Helian Ping to be flustered. General, this is the perfect time to see the difference between Qi Lin and Yi Li said lightly. When Helian Ping finally broke through Qi Lin's rain of arrows, he was already dozens of paces away from the Mahist army's main camp. Helian Ping looked from afar at the white-clothed woman standing in front of the black-clothed men. He sighed somewhat unwillingly. This one sincerely invites Princess to be a guest in the northern tribes. Why is Princess so ungrateful? Chapter 870. Hearing Helian Peng's words, the corner of Yi Li's mouth twitched without leaving a trace. She indifferently said, this consort is also sincerely inviting General Helian to stay for a moment. Why is the general in such a hurry to leave? Helian Peng looked at the distance between the two of them and felt very helpless. It was not that he was in a hurry to leave, but if he did not leave now, he might not be able to leave. The Qi Lin of the Mahist army was indeed extraordinary. Helian Ping didn't care about the few black-clothed men by Yi Li's side individually, but when they joined forces they didn't even make much of a move. Unexpectedly they already made him feel danger. So he had no choice but to retreat far away. Helian Peng looked regretfully at Yi Li and said, I heard that the Qi Lin was personally trained by Princess Ding. It is indeed extraordinary. No wonder Prince Ding dared to charge into the northern militant camp for Princess. Hearing this, Yi Li was stunned. She said in a low voice, what did you say? Seeing her reaction, Helian Peng was also stunned. Mo Shuyao had charged into the northern militant camp alone and caused a bloodbath. Logically speaking, the Mahist army should have announced this a long time ago. How would he know that Emo Xiaoyao was afraid that Yili would be angry if she found out? So he gave a strict order not to announce this matter. The Northern Militant Army naturally would not bring up such a shameful matter. As a result, Yili had not heard any news of this until now. But since he had already said it, Helian Ping did not mind saying more or less. She looked at Yili with a smile and said, "A few days ago, Prince Ding single-handedly killed his way through the Northern Tribes camp. So, Princess Consort doesn't know about this?" Yili's expression darkened slightly. She said lightly, "Thank you, General, for telling me. Now I know." Seeing that Yili did not react as he had expected, it was as if what he had just heard was not a big deal. Helian Ping shrugged his shoulders in disappointment. He smiled and said, "It seems that we won't be able to invite Wang Fei today. We have plenty of time in the future. This general wants to see just how long Princess Consort's Spirit Vulture Mountain camp can last." After he finished speaking, Helian Ping didn't stay any longer and flew off to the rear. As the commander-in-chief of an army, he naturally could not leave the battlefield for too long. Lin Han stood next to Yili and looked at the expressionless Wang Fei. He said carefully, "Wang Fei, please calm your anger. Since there has been no news from the Central Army, I think that the prince is safe." In order to not let Yili know about this matter, Emo Xiaoyao not only satisfied Yili, but also kept it a secret from everyone in the Spirit Vulture Mountain camp. Therefore Lin Han was as shocked as Yili when he heard the news. Yili was silent for a moment before she sighed and said, "The battle here is over. Let's go back and talk about it." Rather than saying that Yili was angry at Emo Xiaoyao for keeping such an important matter from her, she was more shocked and sad. Yili had always known that Emo Xiaoyao treated her extremely well. It could be said that no one in her previous life had treated her as the most important person in his life. No one would believe that Emo Xiaoyao had gone to the Northern Tribes camp on a whim this time. Just because she had been attacked by Helian Ping, Emo Xiaoyao had gone to such an extent. Yili suddenly regretted leaving the Central Army to come to Spirit Vulture Mountain. Perhaps she should have stayed by his side. However, regret was only a momentary feeling. Yili was always rational. She did not think that she was an indispensable existence, but at the same time she knew where to place herself in the situation that was best for the situation. This kind of rationality sometimes seemed cold and indifferent, but wasn't this also another way to help the person he loved? Only by completely ending this battle, only by allowing the Mahist army and the Prince Ding mansion to stabilize, would Emo Xiaoyao's hatred and resentment be completely resolved. Yili did not know that while she was worried and conflicted about Emo Xiaoyao was also furious about Yili's matter. In the Mahist army's tent, Emo Xiaoyao sat on the main seat with a dark expression. He said in a low voice, "So, Wang Fei and Zhoumin only have 100,000 soldiers and are trapped on the mountain by Helian Peng's 200,000 soldiers?" Everyone was silent for a moment. Marquis Nan stood and said, "Prince, I believe that Wang Fei is not trapped on the mountain. She is trying to buy time for General Sun and General He to destroy the Northern Tribes army in Luozhou and Hui City. Once General He and General Sun gain a foothold in the two places, the three sides will surround Helian Peng. Other than being defeated and breaking out, Helian Peng will have no other choice." Feng Jiao also said, "Prince, I think Marquis Nan is right. Also, Spirit Vulture Mountain is easy to defend and hard to attack. It will not be so easy for Helian Ping to take down the camp. In addition, Spirit Vulture Mountain is not far from Feihong Pass. If something really happens, General Yuan Pei will not stand by and do nothing." Emo Xiaoyao naturally did not think of these things. The reason why Feng Jiao said so much was because he was afraid that Emo Xiaoyao would impulsively abandon the 100,000 soldiers and run to Spirit Vulture Mountain. Obviously, Emo Xiaoyao was not as impulsive as he thought. Although his expression was ugly, he did not act impulsively. Feihong Pass's soldiers, Princess Li will not move unless she has no other choice. Feng Jiao, immediately lead 200,000 soldiers to Spirit Vulture Mountain. Emo Xiaoyao said in a low voice. Feng Jiao frowned and said, "No, Prince. If we send 200,000 soldiers to Spirit Vulture Mountain, the main camp will." Feng Jiao believed that with Emo Xiaoyao's ability, 300,000 soldiers would not necessarily be at a disadvantage against 700,000 to 800,000 soldiers of the northern tribes. But that also depended on the time and place. Now that the two armies were facing each other, no matter how strong the Emo family army was, It would be impossible for them to defeat an enemy army that was several times stronger than them. More importantly, it was a waste to send so many elite soldiers to Spirit Vulture Mountain. Emo Shuyao naturally knew that his arrangement was not reasonable. After a moment of silence, he waved his hand and signaled for them to take back their words. If Prince is not worried, how about letting me go to Spirit Vulture Mountain? Han Mingyue, who was sitting at the end of the line beside Han Mingxi, suddenly spoke up. Everyone was stunned. The old officials of the Prince Ding mansion all knew that Prince Ding and young Master Mingyu were good friends, although they did not know why they fell out. But in the past few years, Prince Ding's attitude towards young Master Mingyu was clear to everyone. To say that he did not care was an understatement. If not for Han Mingxi's face, young Master Mingyu would not have a place in Glass City. Even though young Master Mingyu's abilities were far superior to the current head of the Prince Ding mansion, Han Mingyue had always been treated as if she did not exist. Everything was handed over to Han Mingxi and Han Mingxi would be discussed with him. To the extent that young Master Mingyu did not have any power or status, but still had to help his younger brother clean up his messes. It was also because of this that even though Han Mingyue and Han Mingxi had always been inseparable, Han Mingyue had never expressed any opinions in public. Now that she had suddenly spoken up, everyone was rather surprised. Marquis Nan and the others didn't know anything about the grudge between Han Mingyue and Emo Shuyao. Only now did they remember that this young Master Mingyue was also a stunning figure back then, and their eyes couldn't help but light up. Chapter 871. Emo Shuyao snorted softly and was about to refuse, intending to send Feng Jiao to bring people to bring Yi Li back. Han Mingyue smiled faintly and said, I know nothing about war. However, when it comes to saving people, I am more skilled than Feng Jiao. Han Mingyue's martial arts were superior to Feng Jiao's, and more importantly, he was not a subordinate of the Prince Ding mansion. If Yi Li refused to leave in a time of crisis, even Feng Jiao would be helpless. However, Han Mingyue did not have such concerns. Even if he had to use force, Han Mingyue's chances of winning were much higher than Feng Jiao's. Emo Shuyao's mind turned and he nodded, all right, you go. Han Mingxi will stay. If anything happened to Yi Li, I would immediately skin Han Mingxi alive. Seeing Emo Shuyao's threatening gaze, Han Mingyue did not mind and smiled faintly. That's all, I will leave after making some preparations. Actually, Emo Shuyao's worries were unnecessary. Based on Han Mingxi's feelings for Yi Li, he would not harm Yi Li. After all, in this world, he only had Mingxi as his family. Han Mingxi's mouth moved, but he held back and did not speak. Not only was he worried about Yi Li, but also because this matter was an excellent opportunity for his elder brother's situation. As long as Han Mingyue could protect Yi Li's safety, the relationship between Prince Ding and his elder brother should be much better. All these years he had watched his elder brother work so hard for him without getting anything in return. In the eyes of outsiders, it was as if young Master Mingyu was dependent on him, his younger brother. It wasn't that Han Mingxi wasn't guilty. Su Zuodi had been dead for so many years, so it was enough for her to be punished for so many years. He didn't expect his elder brother and Prince Ding's relationship to return to how it used to be. There were many things that couldn't be mended once they were broken. However, at the very least, it would allow Big Brother to receive fair treatment or allow him to go wherever he wanted to go. Big Brother, be careful. Han Mingxi looked at Han Mingyue and said. Han Mingyue smiled faintly and waved her hand, indicating that he didn't need to worry about it. She turned around and left the tent. Feng Jiao watched as Han Mingyue's clothes disappeared from the entrance of the tent. He couldn't help but sigh in his heart. Back then, because of Su Zuodi, the outstanding young Master Mingyu had fallen to such a state. His former good brother, Prince Ding, wasn't any better. For the sake of Princess Ding, he had done a lot of earth-shattering things. The only comparison was that Emo Shuyao's foresight was better than Han Mingyue's. The tent was silent for a moment. Emo Shuyao said in a low voice, "Pass down I's orders. The 3 armies are on standby. Attack the main force of the northern tribes." Everyone's heart trembled. They stood up and replied, "Yes, General." Emo Shuyao's lips curved into a cold smile. "Give Yelu Yi a good beating for this prince. This prince wants to see if Helian Peng wants to come and save him." Feeling a cold wind blow through the tent, the generals couldn't help but shiver. It was so cold. On Spirit Vulture Mountain, Yili was surprised to see Han Mingyue suddenly appear in front of her. Young Master Mingyu, why are you suddenly here? Han Mingyue smiled faintly and said, aren't I here on Prince Ding's orders to invite the princess consort to come? Yili didn't hide the suspicion in her eyes. She looked at him with a smile. Han Mingyue shrugged indifferently and said, Xiaoyao originally wanted to send Feng Zhiyao and 200,000 soldiers to reinforce Spirit Vulture Mountain. Feng San had a hard time persuading him to stay. Yili nodded and said, I believe your words, but I won't go with you. Han Mingyue frowned slightly. Yili sighed helplessly and said, Helian Peng is already in a frenzy. I don't know where he got so many soldiers. Right now there are no less than 300,000 soldiers surrounding Spirit Vulture Mountain. Once Spirit Vulture Mountain is breached, it's hard to say if he will take the opportunity to send his troops to Hong Pass. Even if he doesn't advance, if he turns around to deal with He Su and Sun Yawu, they will be completely annihilated. Han Mingyue sighed and said, so the princess consort plans to stay here and delay him? Yili nodded and said, the morale of an army in battle is very important. The morale of an army is even more important. As the commander of an army, if I run away at this time, Helian Ping won't even need to attack. I'm afraid it won't be long before the Spirit Vulture Mountain camp is completely defeated. The soldiers here weren't all the resolute and battle-hardened Mahist army. Most of them were the remnants of the Dechu state and the soldiers of the Northern Territory who had just joined the Prince Ding mansion. Han Mingyue looked deeply at Yili for a long time. He sighed softly and said, you really are different from other women. No wonder. Fine, if I can't bring you back, I'll be in trouble. I also want to see how far Princess Ding can go. Yili understood his meaning very well. She smiled faintly and said, actually Xiaoyao is too worried. With Qilin here, even if the army is defeated, I won't be in any danger. In a chaotic army, swords and spears have no eyes. In the midst of thousands of soldiers and horses, even a top expert wouldn't dare say that he could escape unscathed. Moreover, Mo Xiao was too worried about Yili. Being worried about her was a natural thing. Did the prince get hurt when he went to the northern tribe camp? After convincing Han Mingyue, Yili then changed the topic to her own concern. Although she knew that Mo Xiao was fine, she still couldn't help but want to know more. The people of the Prince Ding mansion hid it from her because of Mo Xiao's orders. She also didn't want to make things difficult for them. It just so happened that Han Mingyue was someone who didn't need to be restricted by Mo Xiao. Han Mingyue was a little surprised. She clearly didn't think that Yili would know about this matter. She thought about it again and realized where the problem was. The people of the Prince Ding mansion didn't have the guts to go against Mo Xiao's orders. Naturally, it was an outsider who leaked the information. She calmly explained the matter from beginning to end. Although Mo Xiao was injured, those injuries weren't even superficial to them. Only then did Yili truly feel relieved and the expression on her face eased a lot. Han Mingyue curiously looked at the beautiful woman in white who was sitting on the main seat with a gentle expression. Actually, Han Mingyue wasn't familiar with Yili. Although they had fought a few times, they didn't really have a serious conversation. If he was still Mo Xiao's best friend, perhaps he would also become good friends with this Princess Ding. Or perhaps, like the people of the Prince Ding mansion, he would sincerely admire her. But from the beginning he stood on the opposite side of them. Naturally, he didn't have the time to understand this woman. He only felt that Yili's appearance, intelligence, methods and skills were all outstanding among women. She was indeed a rare virtuous wife and mother. But he couldn't understand why this gentle and calm woman could make someone like Mo Xiao so crazy. Actually, this was very easy to understand. It was just like how the world couldn't understand why the stunning Sir Mingyu would ruin his life for Su Zuidi, who only had looks. Love doesn't know where it starts, but it goes deeper. And now, seeing Yili sitting on the main seat with a calm expression, but methodically dealing with the various files on the table, Han Mingyue suddenly felt that she understood a little. This woman indeed had a temperament and beauty that was completely different from ordinary women. Chapter 872. Now I really envy Xiaoyao and Princess, Han Mingyue said with a sigh. Yili looked up at him and gave him a puzzled look. Han Mingyue shook his head and smiled without saying anything. Yili put down her brush and closed the last booklet. She smiled and said, there are some things that should be forgotten and let go. If we don't move forward, no one knows if the scenery ahead will be more beautiful than the one behind. What if we can't forget and let go? Han Mingyue said in a daze. Yili thought for a while and said, in life there are always some things that we can't control. No matter if it's good or bad, when you look back many years later, right or wrong, love or hate, it's just a precious memory in your life. People have to live in the present and look to the future. Looking at Han Mingyue's thoughtful expression, Yili suddenly asked, does young Master Mingyu have any hatred in his heart? Does he hate Su Zuidi or Emo Xiuyao? This was all possible. Han Mingyue was a genius, but because of a woman who only knew how to use him, he lost everything. If Su Zuidi was still alive, if Han Mingyue's mind was a little more fragile, Han Mingyue might really hate her to the bone. But Emo Xiuyao killed Su Zuidi in the end. Han Mingyue had been under the control of the Prince Ding mansion all these years. Han Mingyue could indeed transfer this hatred to Emo Xiuyao. In all these years, very few people mentioned Su Zuidi's name in front of Han Mingyue. But hearing it now, it felt like a lifetime had passed. After a long silence, Han Mingyue shook his head and said with a bitter smile, maybe he hates himself. No matter if it's true love or false love, it's all a kind of life experience. If young Master Mingyu had already walked out of this relationship, why would he still cling on to the past and refuse to let go? Was the young master's obsession with the relationship itself or his own sacrifice? The person has already passed away and the feelings have faded. Could it be that young master still wants to continue to sacrifice the rest of his life for this stubbornness? Yili said indifferently. Han Mingyue was silent for a long time before she stood up and said, many thanks for Wang Fei's advice. I'm going out for a walk. Please go ahead, young master. Yili did not force her. She had said all that she could say. Whether Han Mingyue would listen or not was not within her scope of consideration. The worst that could happen would be the same as the past few years, with more people secretly taking care of him. With Han Mingxi around, Han Mingyue would not cause too much trouble. On the other hand, the camp of the northern tribes was not peaceful either. In the past few days, Helian Ping had brought his army closer and closer. The Royal House Army's camp had already moved to less than 5 miles away from the foot of the Spirit Vulture Mountain. Although they had yet to conquer the Spirit Vulture Mountain, they had already sealed off all the exits up and down the mountain. Helian Ping believed that with his hundreds of thousands of soldiers, they would definitely be able to conquer the Spirit Vulture Mountain in 5 days. By then, even if Yili wanted to lead her men to break out of the encirclement, her few men would definitely not be able to break out of the encirclement of hundreds of thousands of soldiers. Thinking of this, Helian Ping felt that his decision to take the risk of mobilizing all his troops to attack the Spirit Vulture Mountain was the right one. As long as they could conquer the Spirit Vulture Mountain and capture Yili, so what if they lost Luo Prefecture and Hui City? Then wouldn't He Su and Sun Yawu have to obediently give up the 2 cities for the sake of Princess Ding's life? Even if they used it to deal with Emo Xiuyao, it would be the deciding factor. Helian Peng had been in the northern tribes for a long time, so he didn't know much about the Prince Ding mansion and Yili. Thus he didn't take Yelu Ye's warning to heart at all. Naturally, he didn't understand why the nobles of the various countries would rather make a move against Emo Xiuyao than touch Yili. If they could successfully capture Princess Ding alive, it would naturally be an excellent trump card. However, Princess Ding wasn't that easy to capture. Secondly, even if they captured Princess Ding, she might not necessarily be alive. Back then, Enchanting didn't want Yili's life, but Yili would rather fall off a cliff and die than let him capture her and threaten Emo Xiuyao. If they really killed Princess Ding, then Emo Xiuyao would probably really go crazy. At that time he would truly not rest until he was dead. Especially after Rin Qining's unfortunate experience, the nobles of the various countries had an unspoken consensus. Unless they killed Emo Xiuyao himself, it was best not to provoke Princess Ding. Yili was the person Emo Xiuyao cared about the most, but that didn't mean she was his weakness. Helian Ping didn't know what these nobles were thinking, so even after the lesson in the northern tribes camp, Helian Ping still didn't really give up on capturing Yili. However, he didn't plan to use those underhanded methods. He had openly defeated Yili and captured her. Even Emo Xiuyao couldn't say anything. However, at this time Helian Peng's expression was somewhat ugly. He had just received an order from Yelu Yi from the northern tribes camp. In the past few days, the northern tribes army had been beaten back repeatedly by Emo Xiuyao. Yelu Yi wanted him to immediately abandon Spirit Vulture Mountain and lead the army to join forces with the northern tribes camp to deal with Emo Xiuyao. How could Helian Ping tolerate retreating just like that when victory was in sight? General, the 7th prince's order. The man who came to deliver the order asked. Helian Ping pondered for a moment, then said, "Go back and report to the 7th prince. In at most 3 days, this general will be able to capture Princess Ding alive at Spirit Vulture Mountain. At that time we will send reinforcements to the 7th prince." Hearing this, the man's expression turned ugly. "General Helian, this is the 7th prince's order." Regardless of whether the 7th prince's order was right or wrong, there was a saying that a military order was like a mountain. This Helian Ping really had guts, daring to reject the 7th prince's order without even thinking. Helian Ping said, "This general is about to take Spirit Vulture Mountain. If we retreat now, won't all our efforts be for naught? Go back and report to the 7th prince. The 7th prince will definitely understand." The man who delivered the order was furious and angrily said, "How could the 7th prince not know that the general is attacking Spirit Vulture Mountain? But now that the entire army is retreating, only the general intends to advance. If we fall into Dechu State's hinterland, what use is the general's lone army?" What he didn't say was that if it weren't for Helian Peng's relentless attacks on Spirit Vulture Mountain, Prince Ding would not have attacked the northern militant camp in such a frenzy. Helian Peng's expression darkened in displeasure, and he said, "You only need to go back and report this general's words to the 7th prince. How can a small errand runner like you question the important matters of the army?" The man was furious, but he knew that he couldn't persuade Helian Peng. He could only snort, turn around and leave the camp. He quickly rode back to the northern militant camp to meet with Yelu Yi. Seeing Helian Ping drive away Yelu Ye's messenger with just a few words, the generals present all began to worry. Helian Peng was Helian Jin's adopted son, so perhaps it wasn't a big deal. But if the 7th prince were to blame them as subordinates, they wouldn't be able to bear the consequences. One of the generals stood up and hesitated for a moment before advising, "General, the 7th prince is urgently summoning us back. Presumably the war situation is urgent. Should we?" Helian Peng calmly said, "The 7th prince's camp has 700,000 to 800,000 soldiers and horses. The Mahist army doesn't even have 500,000 men. Presumably we can still afford to wait 2 to 3 days. As long as we quickly take Spirit Vulture Mountain and capture Princess Ding alive, not only will the 7th prince not blame us, he will even be happier to reward you. There's no need to say anything more. Pass down my order, we must take Spirit Vulture Mountain within 3 days." Chapter 873. The others looked at each other. Someone said, "But, even if we take Lingjiu Mountain, we may not be able to capture Princess Ding. Princess Ding's subordinate Qi Lin is very powerful. Even if he cannot defeat the army, it is not a problem for him to protect Princess Ding and escape." Helian Peng's expression was calm as he said, "This general only has a suggestion. You all only need to attack Lingjiu Mountain with all your strength." Helian Peng was stubborn and the generals present could not do anything about it. After all, unless Yi Lu Yi removed him from his position, Helian Peng was still a great general. He was still the commander of their army. They could only listen to his orders. The soldiers on Lingjiu Mountain could clearly feel that the attacks at the foot of the mountain were becoming more and more intense. It was as if something was forcing the brave northern tribe soldiers to charge up the mountain without fear of death. As a result, the pressure on the Mahist army on the mountain increased. After defending the defensive line for almost 24 hours without rest, many of the soldiers' faces were stained with fatigue. But 3 days had passed. Even though the northern tribe soldiers had almost charged up the mountain several times, they were still chased down by the stubborn Mahist army soldiers. Helian Peng was so angry that his eyes were red. He stared at the Mahist army camp on the mountainside where the banners were still flying. His eyes were filled with murderous intent. "Princess Ding, immediately have your people surrender. Otherwise, don't blame this general for burning the mountain." Helian Peng's voice came from the foot of the mountain with internal energy. When these words came out, not only the Mahist army on the mountain, even the generals beside Helian Peng were shocked. It was already the end of the 9th month. It was the time when all living things were dying. If Helian Peng really burned the mountain, then it would not only be Lingjiu Mountain that would suffer. On the mountain, Han Mingyue stood by Yi Li's side. She smiled as she looked at the woman in front of her who was as calm as usual. She said, "Princess, if we really let Helian Ping set fire to the mountain, We will really be finished. Yili smiled faintly and said, with young Master Mingyu's martial arts, how can a mere mountain fire harm young master? Han Mingyue smiled calmly. He was indeed not worried. Even if Helian Ping set the fire, it shouldn't be difficult for him to break out of the encirclement with Yili. However, now that the battle had reached this stage, Han Mingyue was really curious about how Yili planned to resolve the current predicament. Wang Fei has a way to break Helian Peng's trap? Yili shook her head and said, no. There are over 200,000 soldiers at the foot of the mountain. Even if we want to break through, we won't be able to. Then what does Wang Fei plan to do? Yili smiled indifferently and said, the one who strikes first gains the advantage. Han Mingyue was stunned. She didn't understand what Yili meant. Yili looked down at Helian Peng's army camp at the foot of the mountain and leisurely said, when it comes to attacking with fire, it's still. That's the ancestor. After saying this, she didn't care whether Han Mingyue understood or not. Yili called Lin Han over and asked, the thing I asked people to prepare yesterday, is it ready? Lin Han nodded and said, reporting to Wang Fei, it's ready. Han Mingyue curiously asked, Wang Fei already knew that Helian Peng would burn down the mountain? Yili shook her head and said, I didn't know. It's just that whether or not he planned to burn down the mountain, I was prepared to do so. Otherwise, we wouldn't even be able to hold on for a day. Not long after, Lin Han brought over an object that looked like a lantern. Although the workmanship was simple, Han Mingyue could still see that it was a lantern. She looked at Yili in confusion and asked, this thing can't be a lantern, right? Yili nodded and smiled. This is indeed a lantern. This is called a Kongming lantern. What can this be used for? Having seen all sorts of exquisite and beautiful lanterns, Han Mingyue didn't think much of the crude lantern in her hands. Yili smiled as she held the lantern and said, as for this, young Master Han will know later. Very quickly, Han Mingyue knew what Yili was going to do first. After the lanterns were lit, they slowly flew up and floated in the direction of the northern tribe's camp. As it was daytime and they were at war, the many lanterns floating in the sky didn't attract the attention of the northern tribes. Maybe they did notice, but they just didn't care. Yili looked on with satisfaction as the Kongming lanterns flew to her predicted location and then slowly landed. Han Mingyue was shocked. The fact that these lanterns could fly was enough to surprise Han Mingyue. Furthermore, they could fly to almost the same side of the sky and land at almost the same time. If not for the fact that she knew that Yili was a human, Han Mingyue would have thought that she had used some sorcery. There is a lot of oil in those lanterns. They shouldn't be burnt out so quickly. Princess Consort wants to. Han Mingyue quickly understood Yili's plan. Yili wanted to use these lanterns to scatter the oil on the camp or the people at the foot of the mountain, and then, sure enough, Yili shouted, release the arrows. Dozens of flaming arrows pierced through the air and shot towards the lanterns that were still in the sky. The moment they touched the arrows, the lanterns immediately ignited and fell from the sky. Hence, the people at the foot of the mountain saw tens of fireballs falling from the sky. Some landed on the people, some landed on the rations in the camp and quickly caught fire. Not long later, the northern tribe's camp at the foot of the mountain turned into a sea of fire. Hence, the northern tribe's army did not have the mood to attack and did not even have the time to save the fire. However, the entire camp was covered in incendiary tung oil, which could be ignited at any moment. How could the fire be put out? Amidst the cheers of the Mahist army, Yili ordered, go down the mountain from the south and retreat towards Feihong Pass. After this incident, Helian Ping would definitely go crazy with anger. At that time, he might really set fire to the mountain. Yili naturally would not stay behind and let the tens of thousands of soldiers die for nothing. Hence, while the northern tribe's army was scrambling to put out the fire, the Mahist army had already retreated from the south. Outside the northern tribe's camp, Helian Peng stared at the sea of fire in front of him. Yili, I will definitely kill you. General, the Mahist army on the mountain has retreated. The scout at the front hurriedly reported. Helian Peng's expression changed. Where did they retreat to? The scout replied, they seem to be retreating towards Feihong Pass. Chase. Helian Peng ordered. General. The few generals' expressions turned ugly. Originally, they were not convinced by this general who appeared out of nowhere. But Helian Peng was too powerful and they did not dare to say anything. But now the camp was burned and their rations were gone. What could they use to chase the Mahist army? There were still more than 200,000 soldiers waiting at Feihong Pass. Furthermore, the Mahist army was not a mix of elites and remnant soldiers. They were all the most elite soldiers of the Mahist army. No matter how powerful Hellion Ping was, he would not be able to take them down without 10 days to half a month. And now they did not even know where the rations were for tomorrow. Chapter 874. Our army's rations have all been burned and we cannot fight anymore. General, please reconsider. The generals advised. Hellion Peng's face turned black. How could he not know that their rations had all been burned? However, he could not take it lying down after being tricked by Yili. He said in a low voice, "Collect rations from the people nearby." The northern tribe's army's rations were just putting it nicely. It was more like snatching rations. However, there were not many people in the north. Even if there were, they would have retreated behind the Mahist army. Even if they wanted to snatch rations, how much could they get? They might not even be able to gather enough rations to feed a few 100,000 soldiers. General Hellion, I feel that we should retreat to the north immediately and meet up with the 7th Prince and old General Hellion. One of the generals said firmly. Hellion Peng's face darkened as he said, "Chase after them. If we can't catch them, we can't let them leave just like that." Helplessly, a few of the generals with strong attitudes left with their men. Only a few generals who were still following Hellion Peng led less than 100,000 soldiers to chase after them. Hellion Peng looked at the army camp that had turned into a sea of fire. The red light reflected on his face, making him look extremely terrifying. The remaining few thousand soldiers of the Mahist army were not cavalrymen. Naturally, they would not be able to move quickly. On the other hand, most of the northern tribe's soldiers were retreating. It did not take long for them to catch up with the Mahist army. Hellion Peng stared at Yili without the usual carefree and arrogant gaze. "Princess Ding, I did not want to hurt you at first. However, you asked for it this time." Yili did not mind his words and said indifferently, "When two armies fight, the victor and loser are both responsible. General Hellion, aren't you being a sore loser?" The veins on Hellion Peng's face popped out. "Good. Ever since I led the army, all of them have been defeated by Princess Ding. Today you and I will fight to the death." Yili shook her head indifferently and smiled. "I know that General Hellion was personally groomed by General Hellion Zhen, a talent of the northern tribes. Unfortunately, there is a word in the Central Plains that I wonder if General Hellion has heard of." Hellion Peng stared at her coldly and said, "I was just about to ask for your advice." Yili smiled faintly. "Talk on paper." "Yili, you are too arrogant." Hellion Peng was furious. He had learned the language of the Central Plains quite well, so he naturally knew what this word meant. Yili was actually mocking him for not knowing how to use of troops. Yili looked at his furious expression and raised her eyebrows. "General Hellion, you don't have to think that I'm humiliating you. Although you've been learning from Hellion Zhen since you were young, you've never led a single celestial soldier before. Hellion Shi, you are Hellion. Forgive Yili for speaking bluntly, but there are many people in the Mo family army who are better than you when it comes to commanding troops. If you did not have the advantage of troops, do you think you could have one?" Hellion Peng's face turned white and purple. After a long time he laughed coldly. "Fine. So what if I don't know how to lead troops? You will still die here today." He did not give Yili a chance to speak. He raised his sword and charged towards Yili. Han Mingyue, who was beside Yili, unsheathed her sword and blocked Hellion Peng's sword. Hellion Peng had seen Han Mingyue in the northern tribe's camp. She dared to charge into the northern tribe's camp to rescue Mo Xiuyao. Her martial arts were not weak. "Who are you?" Han Mingyue smiled and cupped her hands. "I am Han Mingyue. Greetings to General Hellion." "Young Master Mingyue." Hellion Peng was from the northern tribes, but his master was from the Central Plains. Although Murong Xiong was old, he still knew about the famous martial arts experts in the Central Plains. However, Han Mingyue had not appeared in the outside world for many years. Other than the people in the Prince Ding mansion, many people thought that young Master Mingyue had either retired or died. Han Mingyue smiled. "Yes, I am." Hellion Peng sneered. "I don't care what kind of young master you are. Those who block me will die. I would like to experience your skills." Han Mingyue smiled. Hellion Peng did not say a word and directly attacked. Han Mingyue did not hold back. She waved her sword to meet the attack. Han Mingyue was able to call Emo Xiao good friends. She was also able to control the world's #1 intelligence organization, the Tianyi Pavilion. Her martial arts were naturally outstanding. Although she was not as good as the world's top 4 experts, she was not inferior to Helian Ping. When the two of them started fighting, it was naturally hard for them to separate. Helian Ping was in a hurry to capture or kill Yi Li, but Han Mingyue was not in a hurry. He only needed to block Helian Ping and prevent him from hurting Yi Li, so the battle was very easy. On the other side, Lin Han was protecting Yi Li as they watched the battle. Lin Han asked, "Princess, should we help young Master Mingyue?" Yi Li shook her head and smiled. Young Master Mingyue's martial arts are not inferior to Helian Peng's. If we act rashly, we will only cause trouble for him. Lin Han thought for a moment and nodded in agreement. Looking around, a new battlefield had formed around them. The Northern Tribe soldiers and the Maoist army soldiers were already engaged in a battle of life and death. Right now, the two sides were evenly matched in terms of military strength. In a close combat battle, there was no need to care about formations or military tactics. If this battle continued, it would only end with both sides suffering heavy losses and perishing together. Lin Han was about to persuade Yi Li to leave first when the earth-shattering sound of horse hooves came from afar. Lin Han was slightly startled. When he tilted his head to listen, he could not help but exclaim, "Princess, it's General Yuan Pei's men." That was from the direction of the Feihong Pass. Those who could come from there were naturally Yuan Pei's men. Yi Li nodded and looked up. After a while, a black flag with the Maoist army's mark appeared on the ground in the distance. Countless black horses were galloping in this direction. Looking back at the Maoist army soldiers who were still fighting, Yi Li could not help but reveal a relaxed smile. Chapter 875. The Black Cloud Cavalry swept through the entire battlefield like a black whirlwind. Old General Yuan Pei, whose hair and beard were all white, was still vigorous despite his age. He personally led his troops over on his warhorse. Seeing that Yi Li was safe and sound, he clearly let out a sigh of relief. "This general greets the princess." Yi Li hurriedly reached out to support Yuan Pei, who was about to kneel down. She smiled and said, "Old general, there is no need to be so courteous. It's all thanks to you that you felt it." Yuan Pei stood up and said with a smile, "This general is only leading the troops to provide support. Princess, you have been bitterly guarding Spirit Vulture Mountain these past few days. This general admires you." Seeing the old general's serious expression, Yi Li couldn't help but smile and say, "Let's wait until this battle is over before we praise each other." Yuan Pei also couldn't help but smile. He looked towards Helian Ping, who was still fighting with Han Mingyue. His expression changed as he said, "That kid is Helian Zhen's son? He truly has some guts." The Maoist army's hatred for Helian Zhen far exceeded anyone else's. Since Helian Peng was Helian Zhen's son, he naturally couldn't avoid being implicated. Yi Li smiled and said, "He really is Helian Zhen's adopted son." Yuan Pei nodded and said, "Very good. Back then this old man didn't have the opportunity to meet Helian Zhen. Today I'll capture his son and see what he has to say." Helian Peng and Han Mingyue were fighting. Han Mingyue's expression was relaxed and casual. He didn't have any thoughts of winning, so he naturally wasn't in a rush. Meanwhile, Helian Ping saw that he and Han Mingyue couldn't determine a victor in a short amount of time and was secretly anxious. However, Han Mingyue's martial arts weren't something that he could fight and leave as he wished. When the Black Cloud Cavalry arrived in front of him, Helian Ping knew that the situation was hopeless. No matter how unwilling he was, he knew that if he didn't leave now, he wouldn't be able to. Steeling his heart, he used all his strength to slash at Han Mingyue several times. Such a desperate posture made Han Mingyue somewhat flustered for a moment. Only then did Helian Ping take the opportunity to shake off Han Mingyue and retreat into the distance. "Princess Ding, I'll have a taste of Princess Ding's brilliant moves in the future." Landing on a horse, Helian Ping lifted the reins and galloped north. The Northern Tribe soldiers who were fighting with the Maoist army also retreated when they saw that their commander had left. When Yuan Pei saw this, he wanted to command his troops to chase after them, but he was stopped by Yi Li. "Helian Ping has at least 100,000 troops under his command. There's no need to chase them too quickly. He Su and the others should be back by now." When Yuan Pei heard Yi Li's words, he had no choice but to stop. He still had the heavy responsibility of guarding Feihong Pass and could not spend his time fighting with Helian Ping. Helian Ping brought the remaining troops and retreated, but on the way he was intercepted by He Su, who had just returned from taking Hui City to reinforce Spirit Vulture Mountain. Behind them, Yi Li, who had reorganized her troops, chased after them. Under the pincer attack, Helian Ping suffered a great loss. In the end, he could only bring the remaining troops back to the northern tribes' camp. After defeating Helian Ping, Yi Li left Zhou Min behind to guard the West Army, while she brought He Su and Sun Yaowu back to the Mahist Army camp. In the northern tribes' camp, Yellow Yi glared at Helian Ping, who was kneeling in the middle of the tent. He was enraged. "You brought back only a few 100,000 men for I? Helian Ping, you're really something. You dare to disobey I's orders. Who do you think you are?" Yellow Yi was angry not only because Helian Ping's men had suffered heavy losses, but also because the northern tribes' camp had suffered more losses than Helian Ping. However, Helian Ping's disobedience had given Yellow Yi a good excuse to vent his anger. Hence, the first thing Helian Ping did when he returned was to be scolded by Yellow Yi. No commander-in-chief would like such reckless subordinates. Helian Jin's expression was also ugly. Helian Ping was his adopted son and was taught by him. Yellow Yi scolding Helian Ping in front of him was a slap to Helian Jin's face, but this time it was Helian Ping's fault. Even if Helian Jin wanted to plead, he could not say anything. After Yellow Yi finished venting, Helian Jin said, "Seventh Highness, the Mahist army is at its peak now. It's useless for us to vent our anger here." In the past few days, the Mahist army had been like a hot knife through butter. The northern tribes' army had been forced to retreat more than 200 miles. If not, Yellow Yi would not have been in such a hurry to call Helian Ping's army back. Who knew that Helian Ping would disobey orders and cause more than 200,000 soldiers to die in Spirit Vulture Mountain? "Uncle, what do you think?" Yellow Yi suppressed the anger in his heart and asked in a low voice. Helian Jin did not know what to do. In the past, Helian Jin was able to defeat the Mahist army mostly because he had obtained the Mahist army's map first. However, the Mahist army now was not the Mahist army of 10 years ago. There was also no retarded Chu emperor who could give them a map to stab the Mahist army in the back. After thinking for a long time, Helian Jin said in a low voice, "The Mahist army's achievements are outstanding. I'm afraid it will be difficult for us to take them down alone. We need a partner." "Partner?" Yellow Yi frowned. "Who can we partner with now? The north has been destroyed and the western tomb. Mo Jingli is eyeing the south. I'm afraid that Lei Jinting will not fight the Mahist army in the short term." Helian Jin said in a low voice, "Then we'll pull the western tomb and the Dechu state together. Lei Jinting will know that once the northern tribes are finished, the western tomb will be the next to face the Mahist army. If we can destroy the Mahist army first, he will definitely agree." Hearing this, Yellow Yi could not help but think. After a while he asked, "Even so, what should we do about Mo Jingli? Once Lei Jinting and the Mahist army fight, Mo Jingli will definitely cross the Yunlan River and attack the western tomb. At that time all our efforts will be for naught." Helian Ping said, "The enmity between Mo Jingli and Mo Shuyao is no less than ours. If we can persuade him, we can just give him some benefits after destroying the Mahist army." Hearing Helian Ping's words, Yellow Yi was also somewhat moved. He had met Mo Jingli a few times and naturally had some understanding of him. He had great ambitions but was short-sighted and his abilities were average. If they could give him enough benefits, he might really be able to join hands with them to deal with Mo Shuyao. However, the benefits that they could give Mo Jingli must come from Lei Jinting. Therefore, they needed someone who could persuade Genom of Gojoseon to help Lei Jinting. However, Lei Jinting was not as easy to deal with as Mo Jingli. "Uncle, do you have anyone in mind who can persuade Lei Jinting?" There were not many people in the northern tribes who were good at talking. At this moment, Yellow Yi could not think of anyone to send to persuade Lei Jinting. Helian Jin smiled and said, "I am willing to go personally." Yellow Yi frowned slightly and looked at Helian Jin with worry in his eyes. After so many years, Yellow Yi gradually felt that this uncle of his was no longer like the winged cavalry general who dominated the northern tribes. On the contrary, he was gradually becoming more like a politician of the Central Plains. Although he hated Mo Shuyao to the bone, he seemed to have given up on the idea of defeating Mo Shuyao fair and square on the battlefield. At this moment, Yellow Yi did not know whether this was good or bad. Chapter 876. Thinking about it, he really didn't have any suitable subordinates. Yi nodded. If that's the case, then I'll have to trouble Uncle. Helianjin smiled. Rest assured, Your Highness, I won't disappoint Your Highness' expectations. After I leave, the battle with the Mahist army will be as big as possible. If we can't fight, then we'll just have to defend. Once the Xiling and Dechu state armies move, the pressure on Your Highness will immediately lessen. Yi nodded. I understand. Helianjin glanced at Helian Ping, who was still kneeling on the ground. He said hesitantly, Helian Ping. Yi didn't like Helian Ping, so he didn't tell him to get up. Helian Ping could only continue to kneel. Get up. Yi said indifferently. Go back to your tent and stay there. I'll see what I can tell him to do later. Helianjin also knew that it was useless to say more. He could only nod. Thank you, Your Highness, for your forgiveness. Helian Ping stood up. Thank you, Your Highness. Yi snorted, too lazy to pay attention to him. Leaving the tent and returning to Helianjin's tent, Helian Ping knelt down again. Father, please punish me. Helianjin looked at him coldly for a long time before finally asking, Did I tell you that Spirit Vulture Mountain only needed to be defended? Who told you to fight to the death with Princess Ding? Helian Ping lowered his head in silence. Helianjin stared at him and said coldly, His Highness summoned you back. With your intelligence, how could you not see that it was my intention? You actually dared to disobey orders. Helian, I've always had high hopes for you, but ever since you left for battle, you've really disappointed me. Helian Ping was speechless. Not only was Helianjin disappointed in him, even Helian Ping was disappointed in himself. He never thought that he would actually lose to Princess Ding and lose so miserably. Although Helian Ping was born in the northern tribes and was an orphan adopted by Helianjin, he was apprenticed to Murong Xiong, the #1 master of the Central Plains. He had been diligently studying martial arts and Central Plains culture. He had always felt that he was different from the people of the Central Plains who called him a barbarian. This kind of thinking did not change even when he followed his adoptive father to the battlefield and served under the 7th Prince. He even vaguely looked down on the high and mighty 7th Prince. However, after this defeat, he understood that the northern tribes weren't as stupid and reckless as he thought. In fact, they weren't any worse than him. At the very least, on the battlefield of the northern tribes, other than the main camp that was Prince Ding's enemy, the northern tribes had suffered the worst defeat among the other troops. It was only at this moment that Helian Ping truly calmed down and put himself in the position of a general to consider the problem. It was a pity that he had paid the price of the lives of hundreds of thousands of northern tribe soldiers. Seeing the defeated expression on Helian Peng's face, Helianjin sighed and said, Get up. You can't be blamed for everything that happened this time. You're not the first person to be defeated by Princess Ding. This is your first time on the battlefield, so it's inevitable that you'll overlook some things. As long as one was a man, it was inevitable that they would have the mentality of a male supremacy. Especially in this era, even if Yi Li's name shook the world, no matter how many people talked about how powerful Princess Ding was. Even her enemies knew that she wasn't a simple person, but they still underestimated her when they were dealing with her. It wasn't that they were arrogant or careless, but this was the inherent weakness of men in this era. They were too used to seeing women as weak and dependent on men. Even if there were a few powerful ones, there was a limit to how powerful they could be. Helian Peng stood up and said with some shame, Father, please forgive me. I won't make such a mistake again. Helianjin nodded and said, Father raised you up, taught you how to march and fight, and helped you learn martial arts from a master of the Central Plains. It was all for the sake of the day when you can defeat Mo Shuyao on behalf of Father, and also for yourself to achieve a great achievement. Don't disappoint Father. Helian Peng nodded and looked at Helianjin with some worry. Father, do you really plan to go to the Western Hill and persuade Lei Jinting to form an alliance with Mo Jingli and the northern tribes? Helianjin nodded and sighed. There's no hope of defeating the Mahist army with just the strength of the northern tribes. More importantly, once we lose, it won't be as simple as retreating from the Central Plains. I'm afraid that when we return to the royal house of the northern tribes, the Helian family and the 7th Prince will no longer have a place to stand. Therefore, this battle can only be won and not lost. No matter what, we have to persuade Lei Jinting to attack the Prince Ding mansion. I'm afraid Lei Jinting won't be so easy to persuade. Helian Ping said. To persuade Lei Jinting and Mo Jingli at the same time, Lei Jinting had to give up a portion of the benefits that he had already obtained to Emo Jingli. How could Lei Jinting so easily agree to give up what he already had in his hands in exchange for something that was still illusory in the future? Don't worry, I'm afraid that Lei Jinting himself is also anxious to deal with the Prince Ding mansion. Helianjin smiled and said, Lei Jinting isn't young anymore, but his son Lei Tingfeng doesn't have his father's great talent and bold vision. If something happens to Lei Jinting in the future, the Prince Ding mansion's first target will be the Western Hill. Rather than that, Lei Jinting will definitely choose to strike first. But the Dechu state and Emo Jingli have become his worries. As long as we resolve this worry for him, he will naturally agree to attack. Helian Peng was silent for a while before he raised his hands and said, Father is far-sighted, I am not as good as you. Helian Jin patted his son's shoulder and said with a smile, Father needs to pack and prepare to leave. You go. I will leave. In the Mahist army camp, Prince Ding, who had finally waited for his beloved wife to return, was not able to enjoy the endless fortune of having a beautiful wife in his arms as he wished. He could only look pitifully at his beloved wife, who was looking at him with an indifferent expression, his face full of grievance. Lily, what's wrong? Who made you unhappy? Prince Ding carefully looked at Wang Fei and asked softly. Fortunately, there were only the two of them in the tent. Otherwise, the jaws of the Mahist army who did not know His Highness Prince Ding's true colors would drop. Even though he asked this, Emo Xiao was very smart. How could he not know why Lili was acting like this? As he looked at Yili, he quickly calculated in his mind who dared to ruin his plans. Yili raised her eyes and looked at him coolly. She said slowly, Prince is overthinking. Who can make me unhappy? Lili. Finally unable to resist, Emo Xiao leapt over and tightly hugged Yili's waist. His chin rubbed against her shoulder. Li, I was wrong. Yili finally looked at him seriously and asked coolly, what did Prince do wrong? I should not have run to the northern militant camp alone, Emo Xiao hurriedly said as he glanced at Yili's expression. It would have been better if he did not mention it. Once he did, Yili's expression became even uglier. She laughed coldly and said, Prince Ding's martial arts are unparalleled in the world. Of course there is no place he cannot go. What wrong is this? Prince, why did you hide it from me? If I knew earlier, I would have cheered for Prince. Even the concubine had come out. It seemed that she was really angry. Emo Xiao complained inside. Prince Ding was not afraid of anything, but he was afraid of his beloved wife being angry. Feng Xiao always mocked him for being henpecked. That was true, but he was happy to endure it. Chapter 877. Lili, I'm angry. What if you were really kidnapped by Helian Ping? At that time I wanted to kill Helian Ping, then kill Helian Jin and Yilu Yi. That way no one would dare to hurt Li Li. Ignoring Yi Li's struggles, Emo Xiao tightly held her in his arms, his voice somewhat muffled. Hearing this voice that seemed to contain a trace of grievance and panic, Yi Li only felt a throbbing pain in her heart. How could she still be angry? Lifting a hand, she gently stroked the silver hair that hung in front of her chest. Yi Li secretly sighed in her heart. Yi Li lifted Helian Peng's face that was leaning on her body and looked him in the eye. She said softly, I have many people protecting me. How can Helian Peng tie me up? But after I heard it, I was very scared. I couldn't control that feeling. I just want Li Li to stay by my side forever, not leaving for even a moment. Emo Xiao's low and hoarse voice showed his seriousness. Yi Li only felt the rims of her eyes heat up as if something was about to flow out. She could only lower her head and lean on his shoulder, saying in a low voice, Haven't you thought about what if something happens to you? What would I do? What would Xiao Bao Lin and Exener do? Something happens to you, what would I do? Emo Xiao only felt that these were the most moving words in the world. More than love, it made him feel extremely happy. Lili had always been very independent and strong. These words, however, were the weakest words that Emo Xiao had ever heard her say. I'll be fine. Even if it's for Lili, I'll be fine. Emo Xiao happily promised. If everything went smoothly, he could even get away with the matter of charging into the northern militant camp alone. Then he and Lili could. I said that I'll be fine and that you don't need to worry. Do you believe me? Yili raised her head and glanced at him indifferently. She happened to see a certain someone's smug smile before he could retract it. Emo Xiao's handsome face fell. Really, I was wrong. I won't do such a thing again. Don't be angry with me, okay? Seeing him like this, Yili could only sigh helplessly. Who knows where this personality of Emo Xiao's came from? In front of others he was clearly a domineering overlord, but in private he was even more childish than Emo Xiaobao. But even so, Yili was still clear that this kind of shameless and coquettish behavior was only revealed behind the scenes. It did not mean that this was his true nature. Emo Xiao's true nature had unavoidably been tainted with a ruthless side after that world-shaking incident more than a decade ago. No matter what happened in the future, the world would never see the legendary arrogant and upright Heaven's chosen son again. Just like this time with Emo Xiao's intelligence, how could he not think of a better way to resolve this matter? But he did not hesitate to choose the most direct method. Not only was it to intimidate the enemy, it was also to find a way to vent the anger in his heart. Yili understood Emo Xiao well enough. Most of the time she was willing to indulge him, but at the same time she could not help but worry that one day he would hurt others and himself. Lili, do you hate me? Seeing that Yili had not spoken for a long time, Emo Xiao suddenly asked. A trace of sadness and grievance flashed across his half-lowered handsome face, but Yili could tell that this time, it was not like before. He was purposely trying to appease her anger in front of her. Emo Xiao raised his head and looked at Yili with a somewhat gloomy gaze, but more than that, there was unease hidden in the depths of his eyes. Lili cannot hate me. In this world anyone can hate me but Lili cannot. Don't even think about leaving me, Lili. Yili understood Emo Xiao. Having accompanied Emo Xiao for 10 years, he naturally understood Yili well enough. Although Yili was not sloppy in her actions, she was decisive and resolute, and her temperament was even more resolute than that of a man's. But in essence, Yili was not a bloodthirsty and murderous person. If not for the events of the past few years, Emo Xiao believed that Yili could be an ordinary mistress of a prince's household, a virtuous wife and mother. She was not afraid of killing people, but her heart was calm without any hostility or murderous intent. Thus, subconsciously Emo Xiao did not want Yili to know his true thoughts. Even though he knew that he could not hide this from Yili, so he would unconsciously reveal his extremely childish side in front of Yili, he hoped to hide the side of himself that he did not want to reveal to others. In reality, even if Emo Xiao sat in front of everyone and cried loudly, the world would not believe that Prince Ding was truly as childish as a child. They would only think that he had some ulterior motive. Emo Xiao rarely revealed his sinister side in front of Yili, so even Yili could not help but feel a trace of coldness in his words. But Yili knew that Emo Xiao would definitely not harm her. She smiled and gently stroked his handsome face that still had a trace of gloom. What nonsense are you saying? So many things have already passed, and now that I'm about to enjoy life, wouldn't it be foolish for me to leave you? Seeing that Yili's smiling eyes did not have a trace of displeasure or disgust, Emo Xiao's expression became much warmer. He raised his hand to hold Yili's hand and murmured, Li, as long as Li is always with me, no matter what Li wants, I will give it to you. Yili angrily pinched him, just be good and don't make trouble and make me worry. You still dare to say that if anything happens to me, you will throw Xiaobao to become a beggar. Something happens to you, do you know what I will do? Emo Xiao raised his eyes to look at her. Yili smiled and said, if something happens to you, I will take all of the Prince Ding Mansion's assets and remarry. At that time Xiaobao will definitely not become a beggar. You understand? Emo Xiao's expression changed. He did not care that Yili was still on the bed with him. He leaned over and pressed her down on the bed. You're not allowed. Even if I die, you're not allowed to marry anyone else. Otherwise I will kill everyone. Yili raised her eyebrows. Who do you want to kill when you're already dead? Emo Xiao was stunned for a long time and the expression in his eyes kept changing. He stared at Yili for a long time before finally calming down. He leaned against her neck and said in a muffled voice, I won't die. If anyone is going to die, it will be them. Me and Lili will grow old together. Seeing a certain someone's gloomy expression, Yili could not help but laugh softly. She raised a hand to gently stroke his silver hair and said with a smile, Isn't Prince's hair already white? Emo Xiao raised his head and looked at her beautiful smiling face, saying, I have to wait for Lili's hair to also turn white before we can grow old together. Lili, you're not angry anymore, right? Yili sighed softly, you have to keep your word. If there's a next time, I won't just be angry. Do you know how scared I was when I heard Helian Ping say that you barged into the northern tribe's camp alone? Yili was not trying to scare Imo Xiuyao. When she heard Helian Peng's words, she was really scared out of her wits. Although she knew that Imo Xiuyao was fine, but if Imo Xiuyao could barge into the northern tribe's camp because of her being intercepted by Helian Ping, he could possibly do something even more dangerous tomorrow. Unless Yili did nothing and stayed by Imo Xiuyao's side. But they both knew that this was impossible. At least it was impossible now. You're tuning in to the Biao's Wuxiao Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.